Chapter 493. He was still in the middle of studying when Yuan Chuanqing's sudden arrival attracted his attention. As a former deputy general of Jianghu, how could he not know the prime minister of Jianghu? It was just that with his previous status, he couldn't talk to him at all and could only watch from afar. Just now, Yuan Chuanqing's performance fell into Hong Jin's eyes. When he saw the high and mighty prime minister bowing to the sixth young master, he didn't know why, but he felt a burst of joy in his heart. He originally felt inferior because he was a surrendered general, but now it seemed that there was no difference between him and the prime minister. Just as he was thinking about this, Yang Chendong suddenly called out his name. This made him tremble and he couldn't believe what he had just heard. While Hong Jin was still in shock, Tiger's Mane, who was beside Yang Chendong, had already handed him a piece of paper with words written on it. This is the request for the negotiation. Take a good look. This is also a chance for you to perform well. Seize it. Tiger's Mane patted Hong Jin's shoulder as he spoke. This seemingly inconspicuous action made Hong Jin very excited. Who didn't know what kind of person Tiger's Mane was? He was Yang Chendong's most trusted person. Even regimental officers like Luo Pa and Kong Jie were very respectful in front of him. It was definitely Hong Jin's honor that Tiger's Mane thought highly of him. The excited Hong Jin immediately straightened his chest and said with an incomparably firm tone, "Please rest assured, Tiger's Mane and Tiger's Mane. I will definitely handle this matter well." Hong Jin promised solemnly. Under Tiger's Mane's signal, he came in front of Yuan Chuanqing and stretched out his right hand. "Prime Minister Yuan, I will be in charge of the negotiation. Please." Yuan Chuanqing's original intention was to negotiate with Yang Chendong. In his opinion, this was the only way to have an equal relationship. However, Yuan Chuanqing ignored him. If he insisted on staying here, who knew what would happen? Yuan Chuanqing didn't want to ruin their relationship before the negotiation, so he could only sigh and agree. "Thank you, General Hong." Being addressed so politely by Yuan Baiqing, Hong Jin's face was full of joy. "Well said, Prime Minister Yuan, please." Hong Jin's face was full of confidence, but when he really looked at Yang Chendong's conditions, he couldn't help but have a headache. Never in his wildest dreams did he expect the sixth young master's demands to be so harsh. The higher-ups actually demanded that Jianghu hand over all the cities other than Hanoi City. They also demanded that the Jianghu army disarm themselves and hand over their weapons. How was this a negotiation? It was clearly forcing the other party to perish. He did not think that Yuan Chuanqing would agree. Therefore, when the two of them walked out of the military camp and found a quiet courtyard to sit down, Hong Jin was prepared for Yuan Chuanqing to get angry and leave. In fact, Yuan Chuanqing was very angry when he saw Yang Chendong's demands. This was an impossible condition. Fortunately, he didn't come to negotiate, but to buy time. Therefore, he didn't leave in anger like Hong Jin expected. Instead, he said seriously that the Jianghu nation wouldn't accept such conditions and asked them to lower their standards before negotiating. Yuan Chuanqing suddenly said such nice words, and he didn't even say a word of anger. This made Hong Jin feel that it was unrealistic. The Beidai city general's residence was now Yang Chendong's resting place. After dark, Hong Jin came to the inner courtyard after being notified. He saw Yang Chendong, who had just finished his dinner and was drinking tea and resting. "Greetings, Duke of Loyalty and Courage." Hong Jin knelt on the ground with a plop and said sincerely. He wanted to call him the sixth young master, but he knew that with his current status, he didn't have the right to do so. "You're here. How's the situation?" Yang Chendong stretched out his hand and gestured for Hong Jin to get up. He also asked about the negotiations. "Duke of Loyalty, I have already talked to Prime Minister Yuan. He thinks that our demands are too high. He hopes that we can lower our standards," Hong Jin said honestly. "Lower your standards?" Yang Chendong's face flashed with an unknown smile. "He's not angry?" Hearing Yang Chendong's question, Hong Jin was stunned at first. Then he thought for a while and said, "He's a little angry, but he doesn't show it." "Ha ha 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 ha." At this moment, Yang Chendong couldn't help but laugh out loud. He had made demands and conditions that were impossible for the other party to fulfill, but the other party didn't turn hostile or get angry. He only said that the demands were too high. What did this mean? It could only mean that the other party didn't really want to surrender at all. Everything was just a stall for time. So no matter what request Yang Chendong made, they would use all kinds of reasons to reject it. The so-called negotiations, Jiaozhi wasn't sincere, and Yang Qindong was never serious. This was just a way for everyone to test each other. Through this test, Yang Qindong got the result he wanted. That was, the other party was indeed stalling for time. They should be planning something. Before they were ready, they wouldn't easily turn hostile. After understanding this, Yang Qindong knew what to do. He said to Hong Jin, who was still standing on the opposite side waiting for orders, "How about this, when you talk to the other party tomorrow, just say this." At the same time, in a courtyard temporarily provided for Yuan Chunqing, the Prime Minister of Jiaozhi had also finished his meal and was chatting with the guard captain beside him. "You've seen the training ground today, right? With your experience, if we were to go against the mercenaries now, what are our chances of winning?" Yuan Chunqing asked with interest. Although it was true that he was the Prime Minister, he didn't know much about military affairs, unlike the guard beside him, who was originally a military man. Seeing the Prime Minister asking so seriously, the guard captain hesitated for a moment before shaking his head. "The mercenaries' morale is very high. If we were to go against them now, I'm afraid we would lose." "What are our chances of winning?" After Yuan Chunqing asked, he seemed to have thought of something and said, "Just say it boldly. There are only the two of us here." After receiving the Prime Minister's encouragement, the guard captain looked eager to give it a try. Then, he slowly squeezed out 2 words. 20%? Hearing the words, Yuan Chunqing looked at the guard captain suspiciously. Being stared at, the guard captain lowered his head and squeezed out 2 words with difficulty. 10%. Only 10%. Hearing this answer, Yuan Chunqing was clearly very dissatisfied. "Yes, with our current weapons and equipment, it's only 10%. However, if we can have more metal shields, perhaps we can increase it a little. If there's any way to make the mercenaries hesitate, then our chances of winning will be even higher," the guard captain answered honestly. Yuan Chunqing knew that this was the truth, but this result still made him very dissatisfied. He couldn't help but let out a long sigh. Then he began to think in his heart. The Crown Prince had already ordered people to forge metal shields and even said that he wanted to build mobile metal carriages. If that was the case, then it wasn't like they wouldn't be able to retaliate at all. Thinking about how he had already sent people to the Southern Ming Empire, if they could pressure the Duke of Loyalty, then their chances of winning would increase. "Sigh, what we lack is time." Yuan Chunqing sighed. Whether it was forging metal shields, metal carriages, or going to the Southern Ming Empire to ask for help, they all needed time. However, would the mercenaries give them enough time? How could he delay? It seems that there is a need to make some concessions on some matters. Yuan Chunqing muttered to himself. The first negotiation ended without any results. The next morning, without waiting for Hong Jin to leave, Yuan Chunqing took the initiative to look for him. It was no wonder that he couldn't keep his cool. After all, in comparison, he was under more pressure. Hong Jin was still thinking about how to complete the task given to him by the 6th young master. Now that Yuan Chunqing took the initiative to look for him, he was no longer in a hurry. He smiled and invited the Prime Minister, whom he once looked up to sit in his courtyard and drink tea. The initiative was already in his hands, so of course, Hong Jin wasn't in a hurry. However, Yuan Chunqing couldn't. Although he wanted to pretend to be very shrewd, the situation didn't spare him. Seeing that the two of them sat together and drank 2 pots of tea, he couldn't help but take the initiative to say, "General Hong, do you think we can continue the negotiation yesterday?" "Wait, I drank too much tea. I need to go to the toilet." Hong Jin didn't wait for Yuan Chunqing to finish his sentence. He pretended to be in a hurry to pee, apologized, and left. Seeing how arrogant Hong Jin was, the Prime Minister's guard said indignantly, "A petty man intoxicated by success." Of course, Yuan Chunqing heard this. He already knew about Hong Jin's background, and even knew that he was from the Hong family. In the past, even if someone introduced him, whether he wanted to meet such a small figure depended entirely on his mood. Now he was the one putting on airs. Of course, he was angry. However, when he considered the big picture, he had to suppress his anger. Forget it, a great man knows when to yield, right? So what if he lowered his head in front of this petty man? Once Jiaozhi obtained the final victory, not only Hong Jin, but also the entire Hong family, he wouldn't let them off easily. After comforting himself in his heart, Hong Jin waited for nearly an hour before returning to the courtyard with a satisfied look on his face. When he entered, he pretended to be embarrassed and said, "Aya, my stomach isn't feeling well. Sorry for making you wait, Prime Minister." Chapter 494. Although his words sounded nice, he did not seem to be apologetic at all. Yuan Chunqing did not want to lower himself to his level. As long as he could stall for time and let the other party be proud of himself, so what? "General Hong, are you all right now? Can we continue with the discussion about yesterday's matter? After all, you are a citizen of Jianghu, and the Hong family is the cornerstone of Jianghu. For this reason, can we compromise a little?" Seeing Hong Jin sit down again, Yuan Chunqing was afraid that the other party was up to no good, so he said all these in one breath. "Compromise a little? How?" Hong Jin pretended not to understand and asked. "Let's see if we can cede a few cities to the Duke of Loyalty. As you know, yesterday's request is no different from wiping out the entire Jianghu. I really can't agree to it," Yuan Chunqing said shamelessly. "No." Unexpectedly, Hong Jin shook his head and rejected the offer directly. "Please don't, General Hong. For the sake of the Hong family, please compromise a little. Don't worry, when I return, I will promote the people of the Hong family and make them one of the top 6 families. What do you think?" This time, in order to achieve his goal, Yuan Chunqing was really going all out. He could make any kind of promise as long as he could buy some time. As expected, when he mentioned the Hong family, especially when he said that he could make the entire Hong family one of the top 6 families, Hong Jin's eyes lit up, as if he was tempted. "General Hong, you must help me." Yuan Chunqing begged for mercy again. Although he could not make the decision on important matters, if he was willing to help, he could buy some time. Perhaps it was because of Yuan Chunqing's humble attitude, or the benefits of the Hong family. This time, Hong Jin did not reject immediately. Instead, he sat there and closed his eyes. After a few breaths, he suddenly opened his eyes and shook his head again. "It still won't work. The Duke of Loyalty wants Jianghu to be completely submissive. It won't work if we give you a few cities." Hearing that it still won't work, Yuan Chunqing really wanted to cry. But fortunately, Hong Jin suddenly said, "This method won't work, but there is another method that we can try." Hearing that there was still hope, Yuan Chunqing suddenly became energetic. He quickly reached out and grabbed Hong Jin's arm and asked, "Is there any other way?" Seeing how agitated Yuan Chunqing was and how hard he was grabbing his arm, a painful expression flashed across Hong Jin's face. "Hurry up and let go. You're hurting me." "Oh, it's my fault." "All right, General Hong, if you have any ideas, please tell us quickly." Seeing how easily Yuan Chunqing apologized and how anxious he was, Hong Jin felt that the time was right and said slowly, "I'm sure you know what the loyal Duke did after he took over Beidong City since you've been here for a day." "What did I do?" Facing this question, Yuan Chunqing was puzzled and thought hard. As expected of a prime minister, his mind worked quickly. It was unknown what he thought of, but he suddenly raised his head to look at Hong Jin and asked, "General Hong, are you referring to Duke Zhongwei's policy towards the Han and Jianghu people?" Hearing that the topic was about to be discussed, Hong Jin couldn't help but be amazed at how smart the other party was. He nodded at this moment. "That's right. The loyal Duke is very good to his own people. This general has heard from him more than once that he is worried about the status and living conditions of the Han people in Jianghu. If we can work on this aspect, we might be able to cater to his interests and give Jianghu a chance to breathe." Hearing this, Yuan Chunqing's mind spun quickly. He thought that if he could really work on the Han people, wouldn't he be able to buy some time for the crown prince? This was the new request that Hong Jin received when he visited Yang Qindong last night. Previously, Yang Qindong was worried that the Han people would suffer losses if a war broke out. It would be great if they could save them in advance. Right at this moment, Yuan Chunqing arrived. Yang Qindong wouldn't believe that the other party wanted to negotiate or even surrender. It was already good enough that Jianghu was under the Ming dynasty's jurisdiction. However, this wasn't the result that Yang Qindong wanted. If he wanted to raise the status of the Han people, it wasn't just about convincing the enemy. It wasn't even important to convince them. After all, who knew what would happen the next day if they were convinced today? If the current generation was convinced, what would the next generation be like? The best solution wasn't to place hope on others, but to do something with one's own abilities. For example, if Jianghu was completely destroyed and handed over to the Han people to rule, even if there were disloyal people in the future, wouldn't it be like meat rotting in a pot? Thus, from the start, Yang Chendong had no intention of letting Jianghu off. No matter what price the other party had to pay, it was the same. However, the reason why he agreed to negotiate was because there were some things that he needed to prepare. With the 10,000 soldiers in his hands, defeating the Jianghu army wouldn't be a problem. The problem was that after defeating the Jianghu army, he wouldn't have enough strength to rule this place. He didn't want to work so hard only to benefit someone else in the end. Thus, the problem of population was the problem. In order to achieve his goal of ruling this place, Yang Chendong had already sent a message to Qichen City, asking them to gather some people and move them to Jianghu. This would solve the problem of governance after the departure of the Langfeng army and expand the Yang faction's influence and territory. It would take time for those people to arrive. Xianxia's navy was about to attack Jiuzhen Prefecture and other places, so it would take time as well. Thus, why not take advantage of this time to get the Han people of Jianghu over? That way, he wouldn't have to worry about people venting their anger on them or using them to threaten him in the upcoming war. This was why he gave Hong Jin a new mission after meeting him last night. This was why Hong Jin seemed to be persuaded by Yuan Chunqing and took the initiative to give him ideas. Otherwise, with Hong Jin's status as a surrendered general, how would he dare to come up with such an idea and make such a decision? However, how would Yuan Chunqing know all of this? Furthermore, with his worldview and outlook on life, if there was a day when Jianghu attacked the Great Ming, he would definitely not consider the lives of the Jianghu people living in the Great Ming. It was precisely because of this different understanding that he decided to agree to Hong Jin's idea immediately after hearing it. However, he was still a little worried about whether Hong Jin's guess was right or not. What if everything was what they thought and the Duke of Zhongdong attacked them? Wouldn't that be bad? After making up his mind, Yuan Chunqing looked at Hong Jin with a burning gaze. General Hong, are you sure that as long as we send all the Han people in the country over, the Duke of Zhongdong will sit down and negotiate with us? I'm not sure. Hong Jin shook his head honestly, but then he said, but I know that doing this can stall for time, right? And if we can stall for time, we will have time to think of a better way, right? The moment Hong Jin said that, Yuan Chuanqing's heart began to beat faster. He thought that the other party had seen through his intentions. However, when he heard the last sentence, he couldn't help but relax. Yes, doing this could indeed stall for time. Even if they couldn't think of a better idea during this time, at least this could prevent the war from happening immediately. This would give the crown prince and the messenger to the Great Ming more time to prepare. Thinking that this was originally a matter with only benefits and no harm, Yuan Chunqing nodded and agreed. Okay, we will do as General Hong said. I will send someone to send a letter to the crown prince and send all the Han people in the country here. However, this is a huge project. I'm afraid that it can't be done in a year or half a year. The last sentence was said by Yuan Chunqing tentatively. Because if there was really a year or half a year, the crown prince would be able to prepare. Once the iron shields and iron chariots could be manufactured, they would have a chance to fight against the mercenaries. At that time, with the advantage of the number of troops and the fact that they were fighting on their home ground, the chances of winning were not small. What? Half a year or a year? Haha, Prime Minister Yuan, don't joke around. Do you think the Duke of Zhongdong will agree? When Hong Jin heard that it would take such a long time, he couldn't help but laugh. He didn't forget that Yang Chendong set a time limit when he gave him this task last night. Yuan Chunqing didn't really expect that it would take so long. After all, the Jianghu country wasn't big. It wasn't like the Great Ming, where it took a long time to walk from the south to the north. When he saw that he couldn't test Hong Jin, he asked in a consulting tone, then according to General Hong, how long is it appropriate to do this thing? Hong Jin didn't speak immediately. Instead, he raised his hand and stretched out 5 fingers. 5 months? Seeing this gesture, Yuan Chunqing instinctively said, no. Hong Jin shook his head. Then it's 50 days. When he said this, Yuan Chunqing had a bad feeling in his heart. But Hong Jin still shook his head after hearing this. Then he said in an unquestionable tone, 5 days. If it's more than that, I can't guarantee that I can convince the Duke of Zhongdong. What? 5 days? That's impossible. Yuan Chunqing jumped up from the chair and said in an agitated tone. Not to mention that he originally wanted to use this matter to delay time. Even if he really wanted to do it, it was absolutely impossible to do it in 5 days. From some places in Jianghu to Beidai City, 5 days was far from enough. Chapter 495. As if he already knew that Yuan Chunqing would have such a reaction, Hong Jin retracted his 5 fingers and spread out his hands. If that's the case, then there's nothing to talk about. I'll go report to the Duke of Loyalty. Maybe after lunch today, they will send troops to Hanoi City. After saying this, Hong Jin stood up and looked like he was about to leave. How could Yuan Chunqing let Hong Jin leave like this? If that was the case, wouldn't his lobbying mission have failed? Therefore, he immediately reached out and pressed on Hong Jin's shoulder. General Hong, is there anything we can discuss? How about this? How about 3 months? 6 days. 2 months. 7 days. 1 month. 8 days. Half a month. 9 days. The two of them were like peddlers and finally set the time at 10 days. 10 days was the date Yang Chendong gave to Hong Jin. Because within 10 days, Yang Chendong could basically prepare for war. In such a short time, there would definitely be some Han people who couldn't come because they lived too far away. This was something that couldn't be helped. A long night was fraught with problems. If there were a few hundred or even 1,000 Hans in 1 or 2 cities that did not arrive, Yang Chendong would definitely not allow that to happen. 10 days naturally made Yuan Chunqing somewhat dissatisfied. But he also thought that when the time came, he would just delay a bit and try to send some people over within 10 days. After 10 days, there would be more people coming. He didn't believe that at that time, the Duke of Loyalty would really dare to start a war. With each having their own plans, the two sides reached a temporary agreement. Yuan Chunqing wrote a letter personally and sent it to the Crown Prince in Hanoi City. After that, the war in Jianghu obtained a temporary peace. Yunnan Ping Shi Wang residence. The Mu family, which was the closest to Jianghu, had been planting their own intelligence agents in Jianghu. They were the first to know that Yang Chendong had suddenly appeared outside Chui City with his mercenaries and occupied the city. Then, he had sent his troops to Beidai City and occupied the city. After receiving the news, Mu Bin immediately sent the information to the southern Ming Emperor, Zhu Qizhen. After that, he called Wang Ji, the current Right Assistant Minister of the Ministry of War, to help him analyze the current situation. Along with Wang Ji was the outstanding disciple of the Mu family. Muang was not even 30 years old, but he had been in the army for more than 10 years. This child of the Mu family, who had entered the military camp in his teens, not only had extraordinary skills, he was also abnormally brave and fierce when fighting. He became one of the young people of the Mu family that Mu Bin valued the most. The 3 of them were sitting in the side hall of Lord Shiping's mansion. The reason why they didn't call anyone else over was because they wanted to discuss the main point of the matter. Under such a chaotic situation, how should the Mu family make a decision? When discussing such an important matter that concerned the interests of the Mu family, the fewer people who knew about it, the better. Although Muang was still young, he was eloquent and calm in the face of trouble. It was natural to call him over. Wang Ji was even more so. As someone who had been abandoned by Emperor Yingzong, he had no choice but to rely on the Mu family. His thoughts were naturally for the sake of the Mu family. As someone who almost became the minister of the Ministry of War, he naturally had good judgment. Calling him over was a good opportunity to listen to his views on the current situation. Wang Mubin of Shiping was sitting between the two of them. He listened to their opinions without saying a word. The 3 of them knew about the news. Next, it was time to express their views. The first to speak was the young Muang. He first took the information and carefully read it 3 times. Then he shook his head. This is not possible. Everyone knows how many people there are in the mercenaries. It was not easy for them to come out alive with more than 10,000 people. How could they fight their way to the inner part of Jianghu and occupy 2 cities? They even forced their way to Hanoi City? Is there a mistake in the information? It was no wonder that Muang would think this way. It was because he could not do the same thing. Although he was considered a general of the Mu clan, even if he was given 100,000 soldiers, he would not be able to do things so beautifully, let alone 10,000. The information can't be fake. This information has been verified. Mu Bin saw that Wang Ji also did not believe it, so he spoke up to confirm the authenticity of the information. As for the verification he mentioned, it was naturally the same information sent by another intelligence team. For a matter, one person's words could be wrong and could not be trusted completely. However, when everyone said the same thing, there was no doubt that it was true. Originally, Wang Ji also wanted to question this matter. Now that he heard Mu Bin's words, he quickly shut his mouth. If he still doubted it at this time, it was equivalent to doubting Lord Shiping. For him who had offended Emperor Ingzong and had nowhere to go, if he did not cling to Mu Bin's thigh, he would really become a nobody in the world. As soon as Mu Bin said this, the side hall suddenly quieted down again. Obviously, everyone needed to digest this information. Then, after waiting for about 10 minutes, seeing that the two beside him had almost recovered, Mu Bin opened his mouth again and asked, "Okay, now you can say whatever you want to say. There are only the three of us here, so you are not allowed to speak nonsense." The so-called nonsense meant that they could say whatever they wanted. Once they left the room, they would not say it again. No one would be punished for it. Since they could say whatever they wanted, Wang Ji's small eyes rolled for a moment before he said, "If all of this is true, then the combat strength of this mercenary group is too powerful. This loyal duke is too ambitious." "What do you mean?" Mu Bin felt that Wang Ji seemed to be implying something. Seeing that Mu Bin was interested, Wang Ji knew that the opportunity to show off had come. He did not hold back and said everything that was in his mind. "Lord Shiping, think about it. If this is really done by the mercenary group, then how powerful is their strength? With such strength, why did it take nearly 2 months when the Imperial court asked him to deal with the Huang bandits? With their tyrannical strength, they could just push forward. After a few battles, the untrained and disorderly Huang bandit army would scatter and flee in all directions. Not only that, if he really wanted to solve the emperor's problem and did his best, he could have come to quell the chaos in Yunnan after eliminating the Huang bandits. At that time, Prince Min was not powerful yet. He would have had the chance to kill them in Yunnan. Then, the current situation would not have been so complicated." In one breath, Wang Ji said a lot, which faintly revealed a fact. He had always thought that the mercenary group did not fully display their strength, but was hiding it. Then may I ask, under what circumstances should one intentionally conceal one's strength? Could it be that he was plotting something big? Or even the reverse? Did he deliberately want to see something happen? Did he deliberately want to see the chaos become bigger and bigger so that he could benefit from it? After all, anyone who had an invincible army would want to have space to display their strength. Otherwise, wouldn't the jewelry be covered in dust? It had to be said that Wang Ji's deduction did make some sense. Mu Bin had also heard those words, but even though they had already thought of this point, they were still unable to see through Yang Chundong's grand goal of wiping out Jiaoji, raising the prestige of the Han people, and dominating the world. It was not because of other reasons, but because their vision was too narrow. Although they were considered to be in a high position, their eyes were always on the Ming dynasty, and they were also in this environment. Since young, they were taught that the outside world was a barbarian land, and it was incomparably desolate. The center of the world was the Ming dynasty, and those places were pitifully poor. What was the use of occupying them? It was under such conservative thinking that Mu Bin asked such a question. So, the Duke of Loyalty and Courage is deliberately hiding his strength. But why is he doing this? What is the use of damaging Jiaoji? Does he really want to occupy that place? Although this prince has never been there, I have heard many people say that the land there is small, and there are many people there. It is very poor. Using Mu Bin's words, Wang Ji also said, "Of course, he doesn't want to occupy that place. There are no benefits there. The Duke of Loyalty and Courage is doing this to show off his strength. This way, others will be wary of him, and then he can achieve his goal." "Goal? What goal?" This time it was Muong who asked. Hehe. Wang Ji smiled proudly, and then asked Muong, "General Mu, this old man wants to ask you. After hearing about the strength of the mercenary army, if you were to lead an army to fight him, what are your chances of winning?" Muang's face turned red as if he had been asked a question. He wanted to say that he was not afraid of the mercenary army, but when he thought about the way they attacked Jiaoji, it was not something he could do. This courage dissipated in a short time, and he had to shake his head and say, "If the two armies really fight, and fight with swords and spears, I'm afraid our Mu family will not be able to gain any advantage." Hearing Mu Ang's answer without confidence, Wang Ji not only did not make sarcastic remarks, but also nodded. Let's see. Even the Mu family army does not have the confidence to win. Then whether it is Ying Zong or Min Wang, how can they talk about winning? This is equivalent to obtaining victory in terms of momentum before the battle. If they want to use this momentum to ask for something from the emperor, how can they not agree? At this point Mu Bin, who was sitting at the side, finally seemed to have thought it through. Does official Wang mean that the Duke of Loyalty and Courage wants to be a king like this prince? There is indeed such a possibility. After all, we have received news before that the Duke of Loyalty and Courage is very persistent about the throne. Wang Ji nodded and said seriously. Chapter 496. He also wants to be a king? Why? How can the emperor agree so easily? When Mu Wang heard this, he didn't think much of it. The reason why the Mu family was so powerful now was because Mu Bin was conferred the title of king. However, if anyone could be conferred the title of king, then the title of king wouldn't be important, and it wouldn't bring so much glory to the family. In Mu Ang's eyes, it was better to have fewer and fewer kings in the world. This way, the king's status would be more important, and he would have more confidence when he spoke. Mu Wang wasn't the only one who thought this way. Mu Bin also had the same idea. He opened his mouth and added, I'm afraid it won't be so easy to be a king. Will the emperor agree so easily? Of course not. Wang Ji replied with a very certain tone. Then, as if he was afraid that the two people didn't believe him, he continued, King General Mu, think about it. The reason why the Mu family can be conferred the title of king is because you have guarded the southwest for the great Ming dynasty for generations. In addition, your influence is only big in this place. Even if you are conferred the title of king, the emperor won't be so afraid. However, the Duke of Loyalty is different. He is young, and his influence is not only in the southern Ming dynasty, but also in Baiming. If such a person is conferred the title of king, wouldn't it be asking for trouble? More importantly, if there is a war in the future, how will the Duke of Loyalty be rewarded for his meritorious service? Isn't the emperor above the king? Does the Duke of Loyalty have disloyal thoughts? Hearing this, Sheeping King Mu Bin's expression couldn't help but change again and again. Whether he has disloyal thoughts or not, no one knows. But once there is a slight possibility, we must be prepared. Presumably, on this point, Emperor Yingzong must have considered more than us and is more thorough. That's why this old man said it's not easy to confer the title of king. Wang Ji's understanding of Yang Chendong was limited, so he naturally didn't dare to rashly judge some things. However, based on his understanding of Zhu Qizhen, seeing that he was so wary of Yang Chendong, this inference was extremely reasonable. After saying so much, Mu Bin and Mu Wang finally understood. The reason why Yang Chendong suppressed Jiaoji was to use this opportunity to display his military prowess and obtain benefits from Zhu Qizhen. Now, it was up to the emperor to decide. After thinking it through, Mu Wang suddenly chuckled. Speaking of which, the loyal duke took a roundabout route for the sake of fame. In order to achieve this goal, he must have paid a heavy price to enter the Jiaoji army. Mu Wang couldn't be blamed for saying that. He knew how strong the Jiaoji army was. Although it was still a bit worse than the Mu family's army, it was not by much. The mercenaries could win against them, but they should also be the kind that would kill 1,000 of the enemy and lose 800 of their own men. And the price he paid was nothing more than a throne, and it was very likely that he would not be able to obtain it. If that was the case, wouldn't it be equivalent to putting in effort for nothing? But no matter what, this matter had nothing to do with the Mu family army. Regardless of whether the Jiaoji army suffered heavy losses or the mercenaries were heavily injured, they were happy to see it happen. Now that the matter seemed to have been cleared up, everyone's previous worries also disappeared. This originally had nothing to do with the Mu family army. Moreover, no matter how strong the mercenaries were, it was impossible for them to find trouble with the Mu family army after defeating the Jiaoji army. Not to mention that they did not have any conflicts before. Even if they really fought with the Mu family army, what good would it do? Even if there were no benefits, who would be willing to do it? After knowing that no matter how the war developed, it had nothing to do with him, Mu Bin's expression completely relaxed. All right, just send people to keep an eye on this matter. As for how it will develop, there must be someone who has a bigger headache than us. Mu Bin's words were correct. Prince of Min's faction also had the same attitude as him, but they did not care about their own affairs. They were currently thinking of using all their strength to conquer the entire Guangdong province. This was because during this period of time, they had sent troops everywhere and conquered many cities in Guangxi that they had yet to reclaim. Now that the entire Guangxi was in their hands, they naturally set their sights on Guangdong, especially the important Guang province. The person who Mu Bin said would have a bigger headache was naturally the southern Ming Imperial court. The Minister of War, Kuang Yi, who was the first to receive the news, was in a good mood. When Yang Qindong left Gaozhou Prefecture and went straight to Liang Mountain, he also brought Guaning, Ma Wei, Yu Guang, and other generals out of Gaozhou Prefecture and took a detour to Guangzhou Prefecture. After a round of recruitment, in addition to the support of the Imperial court, 10,000 southern Ming soldiers quickly gathered in the Guangzhou Prefecture and had a certain amount of military strength. However, it was also at this time that all kinds of news came from the front. Some were good and some were bad. The so-called bad news was naturally that the Min King and the Miao army had attacked everywhere and finally conquered the entire Guangxi, allowing the Min King's forces to develop even more. There was even news that they were gathering troops. The next target would probably be the Guangzhou Prefecture that they were in. After all, as long as they conquered this place, the entire Guangdong province would not be far from falling into the enemy's hands. For this, other than continuously strengthening the city's defenses and recruiting troops, Kuang Yi continuously sent urgent documents to the capital and Nanjing to request for more support from the imperial court. Other than the bad news, there was also good news. For example, he just received the news that the Duke of Loyalty had brought his mercenaries and killed his way into Jianghu. Not only did they pass through the complicated terrain of the Liang Mountain rainforest, but they also took over Jiaoxi's Tsui City and Beidi City. The southern Ming spy in Jiaoxi said that the current Jiaoxi could not even take care of itself. When this news entered Kuang Ye's hands, he was so happy that he almost jumped up. Now that Jiaoxi was entangled, he would not be able to think about sending troops out of southern Ming. Didn't this mean that they had one less opponent? Kuang Yi was not only old, but his thinking was also very old. In his opinion, the Min King was surnamed Zhu and had the bloodline of Emperor Taizu. The battle with the emperor was an internal battle of the Zhu family. No matter what, the world still belonged to the Zhu family. They could not let an outsider take advantage of it. Good. The Duke of Loyalty is indeed powerful. The mercenaries did not disappoint. With the news that had just arrived, Kuang Yi, who had not smiled for a long time, drank 3 large cups of wine in his temporary residence. He even called his student, Guan Ying, over to drink with him. Guan Ying did not understand why Kuang Yi was so happy. Seeing that the drinking stopped, he asked carefully, "Teacher, this is the victory of the Duke of Loyalty. Why are you so happy?" "Why can't I be happy?" Kuang Yi, who was in a good mood, decided to teach his student well. He asked, "Tell me, if the mercenaries led by the Duke of Loyalty fought with the tyrannical Jiaoxi army, who would win in the end?" This. Guan Ying shook his head. The strength of the mercenaries is indeed tyrannical, especially the continuous fire guns in their hands. No matter who is their enemy, they won't be able to gain any advantages. But in the end, their military strength is too little. They can still win some battles, but to say that they can really wipe out the entire Jiaoxi army is unrealistic. That's right. Kuang Yi nodded with satisfaction and said, "According to what you said, the mercenaries will fight with the Jiaoxi army until both sides suffer losses. If this is the result, it will only be good for the great Ming dynasty." At this moment, Guan Ying finally understood. Then he said tentatively, "Teacher, you mean that this is a battle between 2 tigers? There will be casualties. Even the one who wins won't get any benefits, right?" "That's right." Kuang Yi stroked his beard and said, "Actually, I admire the Duke of Loyalty very much. A hero like him probably wouldn't appear even in a few hundred years. Even Emperor Taizu was not as good as him when he was at his age. If such a person was born in a chaotic world, he would be able to create a new country. It's a pity that he was born in the wrong time. Although our great Ming dynasty is also experiencing war, our foundation is still good. Most of the people have clothes to wear, food to eat, and can live and work in peace and contentment. In such an environment, it is obviously impossible to have any great construction skills." Guan Ying, who was at the side, kept nodding. He agreed with his teacher's analysis. Kuang Yi didn't seem to have finished and continued, This old man admires the Duke of Loyalty and Courage, but I also fear him. This is because young people are sometimes impulsive and do not act according to common sense. I am worried that he will have other thoughts because he has the power weapon. That is why I advise the Emperor to use him while also being on guard against him. Yes, we must be on guard against such people. Guan Ying agreed. After all, it was not the first time that one's merits overshadowed his master's. History has proven that once an official's merits were too great, there would be many rebellions. That is why I am so happy to hear this news. Just as you said, although the mercenary army is powerful, there are too few of them and their foundation is too weak. It is not possible for them to do anything to Jianghu. The best outcome would be for both sides to suffer great losses. In that case, they would also suffer great losses. Without using a single soldier, the Imperial court was able to make the two people whom they were wary of fight to the point where it was difficult to tell who would win. Moreover, they were both in a state of serious injury. Was this not good? Isn't this worthy of a celebration? Kuang Yi finally spoke clearly. When Guan Ying heard this, he could not help but nod. Teacher's analysis is very correct. This student will learn. Chapter 497. Guan Ying, you are actually very smart. Do your job well. Teacher is getting old and will retire one day. When that time comes, the Ministry of War will be under your control. Kuang Yi was so happy that he couldn't help but say what was on his mind. Guan Ying, who was still listening to his teacher's teachings, became excited when he heard this. This was the first time his teacher talked to him about his future. In the past, he thought that Kuang Yi only cared about serving the country and didn't think about personal matters. Now, it seemed that it wasn't that he didn't think about it, but that he didn't want to express it. Kuang Yi was almost 70 years old. How many more years would he be in charge of the Ministry of War? When he retires, he would arrange for his trusted aides to take over. This was human nature. At that time, it would be time for him to rise to the next level. Thank you, teacher. Guan Ying stood up and bowed in gratitude. Kuang Ye's laughter sounded again. It seemed that from this moment onwards, the southern Ming Empire had regained its former prosperity and power. The news was still being passed around and had not reached Nanjing yet. However, when the news reached there, especially after the emissary of Jianghu met with Zhu Qizhen, it would definitely make Emperor Yingzong, who had not been doing well recently, happy. However, these people didn't know that their happiness was for nothing. Everything that was impossible in their eyes was possible in Yang Qindong's hands. They had underestimated the Duke of Loyalty. Jianghu country. Beatty City. 9 days had passed since Hong Jin and Ruan Chunqing agreed on the agreement. In these 9 days, more than 20,000 Han people had arrived at Beatty City. Among them, there were hundreds of Jianghu spies who were hiding among them. They were dressed like the Han people. In addition, they had lived together for many years, so it was easy to disguise themselves. According to Ruan Chunqing, there were at least 10,000 Han people rushing here. There were also many cities that were still mobilizing because they were too far away. All in all, Ruan Chunqing was very proactive in this matter. His actions seemed to be very fast. However, Jianghu wasn't a small country. It was impossible to complete this matter in 10 days. This way, it would be able to stall for time. Yang Qindong had long seen through Ruan Chunqing's thoughts. He didn't point it out because he also needed time to prepare for the battle. With the Han people entering the city, it would be easier for them to conceal their military objectives. As for whether or not there were spies from the Jianghu nation among the 20,000 Han people who had already entered the city, Yang Qindong did not care. After all, these people were going to be sent to Ryukyu Island. At that time, no matter who you are, after studying and living there, you will become a resident of Crimson City. On the surface, Yu Qian was in charge of the management of Crimson City. However, he was more in charge of managing the people's livelihood and the development of various factories. In fact, he was still implementing military control among the people. If one had to describe it, it was a bit like when China was established in the 60s. Every outsider who entered would be strictly checked. Even if you were a Han person, you would be disrupted after entering the city. Yang Qindong was playing this game. Under such a policy, Lang Feng, the auxiliary soldiers, the militia, and even the children's regiment, as well as the residence committee, if anyone tried to do anything, they would be caught and dealt with. Even wearing a big hat on the streets was a common thing. It wasn't worth making a fuss about. Under such an atmosphere, no matter where these 20,000 Han people came from, they would only be on the same side when they arrived at Ryukyu Island. In fact, the moment these 20,000 people entered Beatty City, they were under military control. Then they were escorted out of the city by Lung Feng, the auxiliary soldiers, and the temporary auxiliary soldiers to Chu-Yi City. At the seaside not far from Chu-Yi City, the Xianxia Navy ship was already waiting there. On the ship, not only were there large amounts of firearms and ammunition produced by Crimson City's arsenal, there were also 50,000 Han people. These 50,000 Han Chinese were all young and active members who had performed outstandingly on Ryukyu Island. They were selected by various units and departments. They would become the backbone of the Jianghu country in the future. They would lead the people here to build a new Crimson City. Of course, this so-called building was not really building a modern city. Instead, it was a transfer of management and governance. In other words, it was the continuation of Xianxia's new territory. This was also an expansion from the island to the mainland. This was the first expansion, and there was no prior experience. In order to achieve a better goal, these 50,000 people were only the first batch. There would be a second and third batch, each with 50,000 people. With these 150,000 people as the foundation, and some Lung Feng soldiers stationed here in the future, stabilizing the territory of Jianghu would not be a problem. In truth, Yang Qindong wanted to send more people out from the island. However, these 150,000 youths were already enough to cause Crimson City to suffer. After all, what Ryukyu Island lacked the most was manpower. Being able to squeeze out these 150,000 people was because Yang Qindong had given a strict order, and his subordinates had no choice but to obey. If it had been someone else who had given this order, Yu Qian and the others would have been able to provide 20,000 to 30,000 people. Now, out of the first batch of 50,000 people, other than leaving behind 2,000 people in Chu-Yi City as the backbone to start changing the living conditions there, the remaining 48,000 people were carrying all kinds of food, drinks, and ammunition towards Beidai City. There are still too few people. A long sigh sounded out. This naturally belonged to Yang Qindong. It had been 4 years since he had come to this world. He had been working hard to reach this scale. In the eyes of others, this might be considered very impressive. However, compared to the grand goal in his heart, it was still too far away. If he had 100 million people, even if it was only 20 million people, he would dare to go to Japan and completely occupy it. He would even dare to go to the southwest and southeast of the Great Ming Dynasty. Unfortunately, there were less than 1 million people in Crimson City. Most of them were from conquering the First Shang Dynasty. Otherwise, the 150,000 people in front of him would be enough to make him worry. With a sigh, he thought that he still needed to encourage the people of Crimson City to have more children. Although he had done a series of encouraging measures before, many factories and land needed manpower. Some of the local women had no choice but to participate in farming. However, now that the people of Jianghu were continuously sent to Ryukyu Island, those women could be idle. With them around, as long as the incentives were right, there was no need to worry about a large increase in the population. Turning his thoughts back, Yang Qindong raised his head and asked Tiger's Mane, "Is Nietong's 2nd Regiment in place?" "Young master, the day before yesterday, Commander Nye took the 2nd Regiment's Lung Feng and 10 battalions of naval auxiliary soldiers and headed towards Zhoushan Prefecture's coastline. If I'm not mistaken, they should be preparing to take action." Yang Qindong nodded thoughtfully. "Tell Regiment Commander Nye that after conquering Zhoushan County, don't rush to join us. Continue to send troops out of Sunan County and take it down first. If we need help here, let him know." In other words, there was no need for any reinforcements. With just these 10,000 soldiers, they would be able to take down Jianghu County. Hearing this, Tiger's Mane nodded. "Yes, young master. I will inform Regiment Commander Nye of your orders. But can we really take down Jianghu County with just us? Whether it is the military strength or the territory, it is far greater than Zhoushan County and Sunan County combined." Only Tiger's Mane, who had been by Yang Qindong's side for the longest time, dared to ask such a question. If it was someone else, they would only need to carry out the order. But his considerations were also very reasonable. Conquering a country was one thing. Conquering it was another. If they didn't have enough military strength, they wouldn't be able to do it. Haha. Yang Chendong first smiled, but he didn't immediately answer this question. Instead, he casually pointed outside the door. Following the direction of his finger, Tiger's Mane saw Hong Jin standing respectfully outside, waiting for Yang Chendong to summon him. "Isn't there General Hong Jin?" After casually saying this, Tiger's Mane suddenly thought of something and said in surprise, "Young master means to use him as a general and then—" "That's right." Yang Chendong directly interrupted Tiger's Mane's words and said with a smile, "That's right. There is a saying, to control the barbarians with the barbarians. We can form a Jianghu mercenary army and let them be in charge of the security of Jianghu County. Compared to us, they are more familiar with this place, right?" Yang Chendong was currently thinking about the Japanese army in the future. He had to admit that the Japanese army that invaded China didn't have enough military strength, so he came up with this idea. And it was because of this that he almost completed the act of a snake swallowing an elephant. Since others can use it, he can naturally use it too. In addition, he can also send some troublemakers to Resin City. In this way, without those troublemakers, Hong Jin's pressure will be reduced a lot. After Tiger's Mane understood Yang Chendong's intention, he looked at the young master with admiration. He really didn't know how the young master's brain worked. How could he come up with so many good ideas? Just like using the Jianghu mercenary army to govern the Jianghu people, he wouldn't have thought of this even if he was beaten to death. It wasn't that Tiger's Mane was stupid. It was just that no one had used this method before, so naturally, he wouldn't have thought of it. Chapter 498. "Well, go and wake Hong Jin up," Yang Chendong said casually, then turned around and sat back on the big chair. In front of Tiger's Mane, he could do anything he wanted, but in front of a surrendered general like Hong Jin, he had to maintain his dignity. What was a superior? Not only did he have an imposing manner, but he also had to learn all kinds of methods and use all kinds of environments to enhance his imposing manner. Once he did it well, it would give his subordinates a lot of psychological pressure. When he issued an order, there would naturally be no second opinion. Not long after Yang Chendong sat down, Hong Jin came in under Tiger's Mane's lead. As soon as he entered the room, Hong Jin knelt on the ground, not daring to raise his head, and said in a very respectful voice, "Subordinate Hong Jin greets Duke of Loyalty." As a surrendered general, Hong Jin was very clear about his identity. Not only in front of Yang Chendong, but even in front of some ordinary mercenary officers. He was very respectful. Therefore, for a long time, no one really made things difficult for him. Originally, under the leadership and teaching of Yang Chendong, the mercenaries were very particular about the equality between officers and soldiers. Even if a soldier joined the army, as long as he was not too arrogant, no one would make trouble for him. If Hong Jin's attitude was slightly better, it would be even worse to say that no one would want to make things difficult for him. "Yes." Seeing Hong Jin kneeling in front of him so respectfully, Yang Chendong nodded and then said casually, "You did a good job." Hearing the praise, Hong Jin, who was kneeling there, felt happy. However, he still said cautiously, "It's all thanks to the Duke of Loyalty's good teachings." "All right, there's no need to call me Duke of Loyalty. You're my man, so just call me Sixth Young Master from now on." Yang Chendong slowly straightened his body as he spoke. The change in address meant that he had been initially accepted by Yang Chendong. Hong Jin, who was overjoyed, quickly kowtowed to the ground and said, "Yes, Sixth Young Master." Yang Chendong could understand the slight tremor in Hong Jin's voice. After all, even though the Hong family had some power, it was still far from the Yuan, Chen, Li, Fan, Huang, and Pan families. It could be said that at this moment, Hong Jin really wanted to be understood and recognized. Yang Chendong, who fully understood this, wanted to give Hong Jin a chance to stand out. "Hong Jin, have you ever thought of putting down the things you're doing and doing something else?" The work at hand was to settle the Han people who came from all parts of Jianghu. Even though this job didn't seem like much, most of the Han Chinese who came here were in a daze. Many of them didn't even know why they were here. They were all forced to come here by the Jianghu army. These people didn't have any feelings of gratitude or excitement. Even so, Hong Jin was happy to do these things. In his opinion, some things wouldn't have much effect if he didn't do them at the beginning, but as time passed, as long as he treated these Han people well, they would eventually remember him. Who knew when one or two of these people would stand out? At that time, if they were willing to take care of him, That would be the greatest reward. It was precisely because he had such an idea in his heart that when he suddenly heard Yang Chendong say that he was not allowed to take care of this matter, panic appeared on his face. He didn't know if he did something wrong, or if he did something that Yang Chendong wasn't satisfied with. Therefore, his first reaction was to kowtow to the ground again. Then, he continued to explain, "Sixth young master, this lowly one does things in a rough manner. If there is anything that is not to your liking, please forgive this lowly one. This lowly one knows his mistakes and will definitely correct them." Mistake? What mistake did you make? Even with Yang Chendong's intelligence, he didn't know what to do with Hong Jin's actions. Hearing that there was no blame in Yang Chendong's words, Hong Jin slowly raised his head with a puzzled look. Just as Hong Jin raised his head, Yang Chendong's voice sounded, "This young master wants to give you a chance to stand out, a chance to bring glory to your Hong clan. How about this? You form an army, and you will be the general. The number of people should be around 30,000. Other than the advanced firearms, this young master will provide you with any other weapons. How about it?" Before Yang Chendong could finish his words, there was a heavy thud on the ground. Looking carefully, it was the sound of Hong Jin kneeling and kowtowing. It was just a few kowtows, and there was already blood flowing out from his forehead. "Sixth young master. Thank you. Thank you. I won't say anything else. I will remember your kindness. In the future, if you tell me to go east, I will definitely not go west. The Hong clan will also follow the sixth young master's lead for the rest of my life." It was no wonder that Hong Jin was so emotional. He had worked very hard since he was young, and that was why he had the chance to become Ruan Gangwang's deputy general and lead an army alone. Although he failed in the end when he faced the mercenary army. Didn't he do all this for the sake of bringing glory to the Hong clan? Now, the usually strong Jianghu army was so weak in the face of the mercenary army. If things went wrong, Jianghu would be in big trouble. It was hard to say if the Hong clan would be able to survive. And it was at this time that Yang Chendong allowed him to form his own army. Such a huge contrast was equivalent to a person who was so poor that he couldn't afford to eat suddenly finding a 10 million check in his bowl while begging for food. How could he not be excited and filled with gratitude? Hong Jin knelt there with tears of gratitude on his face. Then he kept swearing. Yang Chendong saw all this, but he wasn't moved. He didn't really want to pity anyone. Because when he thought about how the Han clan would have to be slaves for a few hundred years if it wasn't for his appearance, he was furious. Back then, did anyone pity the Han clan? Of course the answer was no. In this world, it was sad to rely on other people's pity to survive. The most important thing was to have your own strength. As long as he had enough strength, he would be able to gain the recognition and respect of others. Everything else was just fleeting clouds. As for what Hong Jin said, it might be true now. But when he really obtained a high position, when the mercenary army's strength couldn't affect him, who knew what he would do? Instead of placing his hopes on others, it was better to set strict rules from the start. This way, he wouldn't have to worry about other people causing trouble. All right, stop kowtowing. Your body is your own. This young master still needs you. If you get injured because of this and can't lead the army, then I'll have to consider changing you. As Yang Chendong said this, Hong Jin knelt there obediently. Obviously, he was really afraid that Yang Chendong would change him. If that was the case, all his hard work and performance would go down the drain. Seeing that Hong Jin's breathing had stabilized, he wasn't as agitated as before. Yang Chendong's voice sounded again. This young master can allow you to lead an army, but you have to agree to 3 conditions in advance. If you can do it, then this job is yours. If you can't do it, then there's no need to force yourself. This young master won't punish you for this. But if you can't do it, then you won't even have a chance to be free. Do you understand? Understood. This little one understands. 6th young master. Just tell me what to do. At this moment, Hong Jin didn't have the ability to bargain. He had already thought it through. No matter how harsh Yang Chendong's conditions were, he would agree to all of them. No matter how high the requirements were, it was better than not knowing what would happen tomorrow. Seeing that Hong Jin agreed so quickly, Yang Chendong didn't doubt his sincerity. After all, if he was in Hong Jin's shoes, he wouldn't be able to reject the opportunity to lead an army either. Then listen carefully. First, 30,000 soldiers is a limit. No matter what happens in the future, unless there's an order for you, the number of soldiers can't exceed this number. If you're found out, you'll be stripped of your position and investigated. Second, these 30,000 soldiers must listen to the arrangements of the mercenary army unconditionally. If you or any of your subordinates dare to have any selfish thoughts, you'll be killed without mercy. Even you won't be able to escape the crime of not managing your army properly. Third, those who are capable in the Hong family can join the army. Those who aren't can't be forced to join. As for the other Hong family members who aren't young, or the elderly, children and women, this young master will arrange for them to live in another place. I guarantee that they'll have a good life and won't be in any danger. However, they can't live in Jianghu anymore. It's up to you to decide how to do this job. These are the 3 conditions. If you agree to them, this young master will also promise you what I just said. If you don't, then just pretend that I didn't say anything. Yang Qindong stated the 3 conditions and waited for Hong Jin's reply. He didn't have any intention of forcing Hong Jin. There were some things that couldn't be done well without the initiative. As for why he wanted to form a Jianghu mercenary army, it was because the number of mercenaries he had was still too little. If he had to leave behind a sizable army for every territory he conquered, then no amount of mercenaries would be enough. After Yang Qindong finished speaking, Hong Jin, who was kneeling on the ground, heard everything clearly and quickly came to a decision. 6th young master, Hong Jin is willing. Hong Jin naturally understood the meaning behind Yang Qindong's words. He wouldn't be allowed to grow, let alone form his own faction. At the end of the day, he would only be a puppet. Even so, he was still a general of 30,000 soldiers. As long as he didn't go overboard, there shouldn't be any problems. Compared to those Jianghu generals who wanted to go against the mercenary army, those people were destined to die. Hong Jin was already very fortunate to have what he had. Why would he be unwilling? Chapter 499. What's more, Yang Qindong had also said that as long as the Hong family members were capable, they could also be brought into the army. As long as the descendants of the Hong family worked hard and were nurtured well, this 30,000-strong army would be equivalent to the Hong family's own army. Other than a powerful mercenary group, no one else would be able to suppress him. This could also be considered as bringing glory to the Hong family. Hong Jin agreed. This was within Yang Qindong's expectations. All right, since that's the case, Tiger's Mane will tell you what to do. From now on, you can put down whatever you're doing. Tomorrow was the 10th day. Yang Qindong had already made his preparations and was about to launch a fierce offensive. Naturally, he would have to put aside the matter of accepting the Hans for now. However, Hong Jin did not know about this. He thought that someone else would take over his job. Now that he was focused on becoming a general, he kowtowed and expressed his gratitude before leaving with Tiger's Mane. After exiting the room, Tiger's Mane walked out while speaking to Hong Jin, who had his head lowered and was one step behind him. You're quite lucky. The young master chose you because of your recent good performance. However, I hope that you can continue to work hard and don't think of other things. Yes, Tiger's Mane is right. Hong Jin will remember. Since the young master has allowed you to become a general, you can go and pick soldiers now. There are 20,000 Jianghu citizens in Beidai City. Among them, there are around 6,000 youths. You can choose 2,000 of them to follow the mercenary army to the battlefield tomorrow. Of course, you won't be doing anything dangerous. You'll just have to clean up the battlefield, watch over the prisoners, and collect military supplies. Tiger's Mane spoke softly, but these words were like a bolt from the blue in Hong Jin's ears. His mind went blank. Tomorrow? Yes. Tiger's Mane nodded. Since he had decided to use Hong Jin, there were some things that he was not afraid of in advance. The young master and Jianghu have been feigning civility for 9 days. All the preparations have been completed. Naturally, it's time to turn hostile. Hong Jin could no longer hear Tiger's Mane's next words. His mind was still muddled. He had always thought that the mercenaries couldn't take down the entire Jianghu, and he didn't want to continue fighting. That was why he decided to negotiate with them. As for his position as a general, it should only be to protect Chu-Yi and Beidai cities. But now, he realized that he couldn't see through Yang Qindong at all. Naturally, he couldn't know what Yang Qindong was really thinking. Could it be? Could it be that Jianghu is really going to be destroyed? As soon as this thought appeared in his mind, Hong Jin became excited. If he only wanted to govern Chu Yi and the northern belt before, wouldn't he be able to govern the entire Jianghu region? If that was the case, he would have a lot of power. The excitement only lasted for a moment before Hong Jin thought of another terrifying result. His Hong family was still in Zhoushan Prefecture. Because both sides were negotiating, the Jianghu army naturally wouldn't do anything to the Hong family. But once the war started, how could he guarantee his family's safety? Tiger's mane, my Hong family. Hu Mang already knew what Hong Jin wanted to say, so he directly interrupted him and said, "Your Hong family doesn't need to worry." At this moment, the Zhoushan county should have already been captured by the mercenary navy. Your Hong family will be safe. Zhoushan Prefecture. It faced the sea from east to west, connected to Jianghu Prefecture in the north, and connected to Reincarnated Prefecture in the south. It was an important transportation link in Jianghu. Previously, Crown Prince Li Yuanlong stayed here to stabilize the situation in Jianghu. But because Hanoi City was in danger, the old King Lily didn't care. The Crown Prince had no choice but to leave for the capital to find a solution. After the Crown Prince left, the normally tense Jianghu officials were relieved that there was no longer a curse on their heads. Although the mercenaries had appeared in Chuyi City and Beidai City, they were still some distance away from them. Not to mention, they had already received orders to send all the Han people out to negotiate with the mercenaries. Since it was a peace negotiation, there was no need to worry about the safety here. Coincidentally, it was drizzling today, so the generals and soldiers guarding the coastline went into their rooms to slack off. May Island. It was near Wuxia City, the source of the eastern coastline of Jianghu. Usually, there were hundreds of Jianghu soldiers stationed here. Once they discovered any enemy, they would immediately light the beacon on the island to provide information to the city less than 100 miles away. It was drizzling today. It had been raining since morning, and there was even a moderate drizzle in the afternoon. Under such terrible weather, the visibility on the sea was not high. The Jianghu soldiers in charge of the lookout could only see about 20 meters ahead of them. Beyond that, all they could see was a vast expanse of whiteness. With their vision obstructed and the fact that there had been no enemy here for many years, the soldiers let down their guard. Under the drizzle, other than the 2 lookout posts on the north and south, the rest of the soldiers had gone to rest in the barracks. In this environment where not even a single bird could be seen, a small boat slowly approached Miao Island. When it was about 100 meters away from the island, it suddenly stopped. Rain and fog were everywhere, forming a very good protection, making it difficult for people to spot it. As soon as the boat came to a stop, 8 men in black tights appeared on the boat and disappeared in a flash. After a few soft splashes, the 8 men dived into the water and headed straight for Miao Island, which was 100 meters away. Just like the Wolfang Special Forces on land, they were like a sharp knife that could be stabbed into the enemy's chest at any time. In the Navy, Division Commander Gao Xiong had invested a lot of energy and resources to form an elite team that struck fear in the hearts of the enemy. They were the Marine Corps. Since its establishment, the Marine Corps had completed no less than 20 missions. Many ships traveling in this sea area wanted to quietly pass by without paying the protection fee, but in the end, the ships sank to the bottom of the sea, which was partly due to their efforts. This time, in order to complete the mission taught by the 6th Young Master, Commander Nye Tong had transferred a platoon of Marine Corps from Division Commander Gao Xiong. The 8 men just now were just the first batch of soldiers to enter the sea. With the first batch, there would naturally be a second batch. In the blink of an eye, another 8 men had disappeared into the sea. After a few more batches, a platoon of 30 soldiers had entered the sea. About half an hour after these people entered the sea, many large warships appeared behind the small boat. It was as if they had descended from the sky. They first appeared in the white fog, then slowly approached Miao Island. The soldiers on May Island were completely unaware of this. They did not know that their fate had already been decided at this moment. They also did not know that at the edge of the island, 30 mercenaries armed with Type 95 mercenaries had already landed on the shore and were slowly approaching them. They had already practiced infiltration and landing on the island countless times. It was just a group of 100 unprepared enemies. These elite soldiers did not even consider them a threat. If not for the fact that they were afraid of alerting the enemy and causing them to ignite the fire beacon, which would hinder their next attack on the beach, they would not have needed to infiltrate like this and would have directly attacked. Even though they were very confident in their own combat strength, when they reached the island from the sea, the 30 elite soldiers did not immediately make their move. Instead, they carefully observed the terrain. Discovering that it was the same as what they had predicted, other than the 2 Jianghu soldiers on the lookout posts, there were no other enemies. As the platoon leader of the Marine Corps, Feng Liao Ran raised his right hand and made a gesture. Following that, the 10 soldiers advanced forward like foxes. This squad of soldiers was not only responsible for dealing with the enemies on the lookout posts, they were also responsible for protecting the beacon towers that could be ignited at any time. As for Feng Liao Ran, he led the remaining 2 squads of soldiers towards the only military camp on the island, which was a row of stone bungalows. Without any warning, the silencer on the 95 gun fired a bullet. The 2 Jianghu soldiers who were still dozing off saw the King of Hell. Following the elimination of the outer sentries, Feng Liao Ran and the rest began to increase their speed. However, their worries were unfounded. Even when they rushed to the entrance of the bungalow, they were still not discovered, and not a single person walked out of the bungalow. Prepare the smoke grenades. Feng Liao Ran raised his right hand and ordered while holding his gun. Ever since the smoke grenades were taken out by Yang Chendong from the warehouse, they had been the research object of the Crimson City's arsenal. Finally, they had successfully replicated it a while ago. However, because too many things were involved, they were still unable to mass-produce them. However, an elite force like the Marine Corps was naturally equipped with them. Break the door and throw the grenades. With a very straightforward battle order, a Marine raised his right leg and fiercely kicked towards the camp gate. Clang! The moment the door was opened, 2 smoke grenades were successfully thrown in. Then the door was closed. 2 platoons of Marines stared at the door. 21 muzzles were aimed at it to prevent any accidents from happening. Cough, cough, cough. In less than 2 breaths of time, loud coughing sounds echoed throughout the camp. Then the camp door was pushed open, and the Jianghu soldiers who were choking with tears in their eyes ran out. The first Jianghu soldier who ran out did not even have time to see what was going on outside when he felt his body become light and was sent flying. Before he could regain his composure and see what was going on around him, a cold muzzle was pointed at his head. Chapter 500. The second soldier suffered the same fate, followed by the third, the fourth. It was just like a normal drill. There were only 20 Marines, and they captured all of the Jianghu soldiers who were running around alone. From the moment they broke through the door to the end, it took less than 15 minutes, and the overall situation was decided. Maple Piaoran led 2 of his team members into the barracks, but there was only a mess here. When there was not a single person in sight, the battle was declared to have ended. The swift action plan and lightning-fast surprise attack gave people the feeling that they were using a sledgehammer to kill a chicken. Even though Maple Piaoran and the other soldiers had complete control of May Island, they did not show any excitement on their faces. Perhaps to them, the mission was too easy to complete, and there was no longer any sense of challenge, let alone excitement. The warship behind them sailed past May Island. When Commander Nye Yong saw Maple Piaoran and the other soldiers saluting him, he immediately returned a standard military salute, and then said to the deputy commander beside him, "Leave 1 warship for platoon leader Maple, the rest of the ships move forward at full speed, the destination is No Weave City." After the order was given, the steam-powered ships that had been modified by the shipyard in Xianxia City suddenly emitted black smoke, and like an arrow released from a bow, they flew across the sea and headed straight for No Weave City, which was dozens of miles away. No Weave City. It was still drizzling, but the soldiers and civilians of Jianghu who had long been accustomed to such terrible weather did not have much of an impact. The city gates were wide open, and people were constantly entering and exiting. All kinds of hawking sounds could be heard, and it was very lively. On the tower of No Weave City, a Jianghu soldier was leaning against a stone pillar and taking a nap. Perhaps it was the raindrops that fell on his face, causing him to slowly open his eyes at this moment. As he reached out to wipe the raindrops off his face, his gaze swept across the distance, and then he closed his eyes to continue his nap. But just as his head was about to lower, he suddenly thought of something and opened his eyes abruptly. He then pointed at the coastline in the distance with a somewhat shocked expression, and his voice also became a little stuttered due to the fear. "Enemy, enemy, enemy, enemy attack." Following this shout, the large ship in the distance had finished docking, and more black figures were running in this direction. More and more Jianghu soldiers saw this scene from the top of the city walls and fell into chaos. Caught off guard by the sudden appearance of the enemy along the coastline and without receiving any signal from the island, the Jianghu soldiers were completely unprepared. They didn't even have the time to close the city gates. All they could do was watch helplessly as the mercenaries in white sailor uniforms approached and entered the city. No Weave City is finished. Southern Ming Dynasty's capital. Nanjing House. The travel-worn Jianghu diplomatic group entered the city. When the news reached the ears of Zhu Qizhen, who was having a meal with Empress Qian in the palace, a smile finally appeared on his face. Long before the Jianghu diplomatic mission entered the southern border, the embroidered uniform guard in charge of gathering information had already found out about their objective. The Duke of Zhongdang had unexpectedly led his troops through the Langsun region. Following that, he took down Tsui and Bei Dai, catching the Jianghu army by surprise. When the news spread, even Zhu Qizhen was shocked. He knew how powerful Yang Chendong was, and he had a clear understanding and evaluation of the military strength of the mercenaries. However, he still didn't expect them to be so powerful and so fast. They actually managed to kill their way into the inner region of Jianghu. It took him a long time to calm down from the shock. Zhu Qizhen was overjoyed as he knew his chance had come. Although Yang Chendong's strength was not what he wanted to see, his current actions had indeed solved a lot of problems for him. Once the southwest Jianghu surrendered, Shiping King Mu Bin would be free and would no longer need to defend the southwest. When that time comes, he would be able to send out his troops to attack the Min King. If that was the case, then he had seen hope in reclaiming the lost land in the southwest. The excited Zhu Qizhen suppressed the urge to order Mu Bin to send out his troops. He decided to see what the Jianghu envoy group had to say first. Since they were here to admit defeat, he was not going to let them off the hook this time. He was going to squeeze them dry. He wouldn't forget that if the Jianghu army hadn't helped the Min King, how could the other party have become so powerful? He also wouldn't forget that old man Li Li still wanted to marry his third princess. "What's wrong, Your Majesty? You seem to be very happy." Empress Qian noticed that Zhu Qizhen became much more excited after Cao Jixiang came over and told him about the Jianghu diplomatic mission. As the empress, she was naturally happy for the emperor. "Haha, Empress, we can finally hold our heads high this time. Just watch. It won't be long before the matter of the southwest is resolved. Once that matter is resolved, we will work hard to govern. There will come a day when we return to the capital of the north. There can only be one great Ming, and there must be one." Seeing the emperor in such high spirits, Empress Qian was naturally overjoyed. She even ate an extra bowl of rice due to her poor appetite. The Jianghu diplomatic mission entered the capital. As soon as they entered the relay station, they sent a letter to the Bureau of Rights, requesting an audience with Lu Da, the Minister of Rights, and the Emperor of the Southern Ming Dynasty. Zhu Qizhen had already issued a decree, so how could Lu Da allow the other party to meet the Emperor so easily? Even he didn't plan on meeting the other party immediately. Instead, he sent a right assistant minister to probe the other party's bottom line. In Nanjing, the Jianghu diplomatic mission and the Southern Ming Bureau of Rights were still probing each other. Within Jianghu, scouts were galloping on horseback. They were all soldiers sent by the various cities of Jianghu County to ask for reinforcements. In the face of Nie Tong's Lengfengai army and 2 naval auxiliary divisions, they had captured one city after another. In just the first day, Wuxia and Shupu cities had fallen. If there were no accidents, tomorrow at this time, the city walls would not be high, and the defenders would only have 2,000 soldiers, so Jufeng City would also be breached. Such speed made the generals of the various cities of Jianghu County tremble in fear. They could only send people out to Haniai City to ask for reinforcements. However, even the generals who sent people out knew that distant water couldn't quench their immediate thirst. Before reinforcements arrived, they would lose their cities and their positions. This time, even if they lost, they couldn't understand why. Didn't they say they were going to negotiate? Moreover, the negotiations were going smoothly. Why did the mercenaries suddenly attack? What was going on? Jianghu Prime Minister Yuan Chunqing also didn't understand what was going on. While they were eating dinner in their temporary residence, the head of the guard suddenly came to report that there were many more mercenaries outside the residence. They had actually surrounded the residence. "They surrounded us? What do they want?" Yuan Chunqing hurriedly put down his chopsticks and looked at the guard captain in confusion. This subordinate doesn't know. The guard captain shook his head and added, however, those people don't seem to have any intention of charging in. They're just guarding the door and preventing our people from entering. They're only surrounding us? Could it be that there's a change in the military situation? The Prime Minister was indeed the Prime Minister. Yuan Chunqing immediately thought of a possibility. Then he exclaimed, quickly, go negotiate with the mercenaries outside. I want to see the Duke of Loyalty. If that doesn't work, I can also see General Hong Jin. The sudden change made Yuan Chunqing's expression change greatly, although he still didn't know what had happened outside. Although he didn't know what was going on outside, just the fact that the residence was surrounded was enough for him to think of the worst. Sir, this subordinate has tried, but the other party didn't pay attention to me. The guard captain first raised his head and looked at Yang Chendong with a very difficult expression. Then he lowered his head again. Plop! Yuan Chunqing sat back down on the wooden chair. His eyes were glazed over. He knew that this time the matter was serious. The moment Prime Minister Ruan's temporary residence was surrounded was the moment the mercenaries set out. 50,000 young Han people from Jianghu had already entered Beidai City. Along with them were 5,000 Type 81 rifles made in Xianxia City's arsenal, as well as 20 individual rocket launchers and some corresponding firearms and ammunition. This was all that the munitions factory had in stock at the moment. Although Gao Xiong had dominated the seas with the navy and obtained a lot of copper and iron, the actual production was still very low. It was different from the production lines of factories in the future. Many things still needed to be completed by manpower. This made it so that during normal times, the things produced could still be used by the army. However, once there was a war, the production and consumption could not be proportional. For this matter, Yang Chendong had ordered the arsenal to continue expanding. His footsteps of conquering the world did not want to stop because of firearms and ammunition. However, some things could not be eaten in one bite. It needed to be digested and absorbed slowly. The manufacturing of weapons was based on this principle. The 5,000 Type 81 rifles sent from the rear were only for Lung Feng and the auxiliary soldiers to use. After all, if a gun fired too many bullets, there would be problems with the rifling. Problems such as the accuracy of the gun and the jamming of bullets would follow one after another. It was necessary to have a replacement port. The lack of firearms was also the reason why Yang Chendong allowed Hong Jin to form his own mercenary army. Firstly, there would be someone to manage Jianghu in the future. Secondly, to prevent firearms from being wasted for no reason, there would be a need for some cold weapons battles. This was the time when Hong Jin and the rest could be used. Chapter 501. However, in order to prevent a situation like this from happening in the future, they were only allowed to have 30,000 soldiers. This was a form of self-protection. With weapons and sufficient manpower, Yang Chendong did not want to wait any longer. He wanted to take down Jianghu first. This was the first step towards achieving his life goal. If he could not even conquer a small country like Jianghu, how could he conquer the entire world? Only one auxiliary battalion and one temporary auxiliary battalion were left in Beidai City. Not counting the companies directly under the regiment, there were a total of 20 fully staffed battalions. They set off from Beidai City towards Hanoi City. The person in charge of the vanguard was the commander of the 3rd Battalion, Kong Chuanxin. The commander of the 1st Battalion, Wu Shang, was still fighting the black soldiers of the Jiaoji Chen Heijin tribe in the Langsun region. The commander of the 2nd Battalion, Chen Bo, had led his men to take down Beidai City previously. This time, it was finally Kong Chuanxin's 3rd Battalion's turn to make a name for themselves. 9 days ago, Battalion Commander Kong received the news. He gathered 4 of his elite company commanders and trained them according to the situation in Hanoi. Now that the army was finally ready to depart, the 3rd Battalion and 2 auxiliary battalions of the 2nd Regiment of the Cold Front set off 2 hours ahead of the main force. The moment they left Beidai City, Commander Kong Chuanxin gave the order for the troops to set off at full speed. He only gave everyone 20 hours to cover the distance of nearly 200 miles. This was a forced march. The troops had to reach Hanoi City before daybreak and rest for at least 4 hours before starting the siege. Once the order was given, it had to be carried out. The requirement to cover 200 li in 20 hours did not tire the soldiers out. On the contrary, they were all excited. Even the 4 auxiliary battalions at the back of the troops had high morale. After witnessing the power of the continuous fire guns, there was not a single soldier who did not want to own a gun of their own. Thus, becoming an auxiliary battalion became the hope of many. They did not have the chance in the past. Now that the opportunity was right in front of them, everyone was fighting to be the first. It was precisely because of their strong morale that the 7 battalions of mercenaries marched at a speed that somewhat exceeded the expectations of battalion commander Kong Chuanxin. They actually ran all the way to Hanoi City. Based on this speed, it was likely that they would arrive 2 hours earlier than the original plan. This would give everyone more time to rest under the city, and they would have more confidence in taking down Hanoi City in one battle. Hanoi City. Under King Li Li's complete control, everything here was managed by the Crown Prince Li Yuanlong. When they arrived at Hanoi from Jiuzhen Prefecture, Li Yuanlong was a little worried. From time to time, there would be mercenaries patrolling the waters around the Jiuzhen Prefecture, so he knew better than anyone else what kind of opponent he was facing. With the current strength of the Jiaoxi kingdom, they had no chance of winning against the cannons and guns. Unless they could produce more ironware, they might be able to rely on their defense and terrain advantage to resist for a period of time. It seemed that Li Yuanlong was worried about whether he had enough time. Fortunately, he had sent out his trump card, Prime Minister Yuan Chunqing, and he did not let him down. As soon as he entered Beidai City, he stabilized the momentum of the mercenaries. With sufficient time and the diplomatic mission sent to the capital of the Southern Ming dynasty, Nanjing, once the Southern Ming Emperor issued an imperial edict, the loyal Duke of the Great Ming dynasty would have no choice but to give up. The hope of the Jiaoxi kingdom would reappear. It seemed that the situation was developing in his favor. Li Yuanlong's complexion had also improved a lot over the past few days. In addition, he did not place his hopes on anyone else. The blacksmiths in the army were working day and night to produce iron shields. Even some of the private blacksmiths in the city were temporarily recruited to help with the production of iron carriages. They had already produced 10 iron carriages that could accommodate 200 people, as well as 2,000 iron shields. With this, he could finally breathe a sigh of relief. After all, Jiaoxi had been established for more than 20 years, so it still had some war reserves. Otherwise, how would it dare to agree to the Min King's request to stir up trouble in the Southern Ming Empire? Just like now, after a few days of adjustment, there were now about 80,000 soldiers in Hanoi City. With the existence of these 80,000 soldiers, Hanoi City gave outsiders the impression that it was impregnable. Nearly 300,000 citizens of Hanoi City walked out of the fog of war, and the businesses on the streets returned to normal. From afar, it was a bustling scene. However, all of this changed as the scout in front of them galloped into the city. Report. Crown Prince Li Yuanlong had just finished inspecting the military supplies and returned to his residence. He did not even have the time to sit down and drink a cup of tea before he saw the scout who was drenched in the rain. For some reason, Li Yuanlong's heart skipped a beat when he saw the scout in such a sorry state. He had a bad feeling about this. However, he did not show it. Instead, he tried his best to stabilize his body and mind. Why are you panicking? Reporting to Your Highness the Crown Prince. This morning, the gates of Beidai City suddenly opened wide. Then, thousands of mercenaries came out of the gates and headed straight for Hanoi City. After the anxious scout finished reporting, he couldn't help but gulp a mouthful of saliva. From the moment he received the news until he returned to the city, he did not stop for a moment. As a result, his body was severely dehydrated. However, he did not have the time to drink water. He only wanted to deliver the news as soon as possible so that the Crown Prince could be prepared. Even though he was mentally prepared, when he heard the scout's report, Li Yuanlong could not help but feel a wave of dizziness. The scout's figure also swayed in front of him. After a few breaths, Li Yuanlong slowly adjusted his breathing. Then, he tried his best to use a calm voice to ask, "You said that there were thousands of people coming out of the city. How many are there?" "Around 3,000. The scout thought for a moment before replying cautiously. Anyone who could become a scout was not only agile, but more importantly, had extraordinary eyesight. Otherwise, erroneous military intelligence could lead to extremely serious consequences. Even though he only saw the mercenaries coming out of the city, he was still able to estimate the enemy's actual military strength. When he heard that there were only 3,000 people, Li Yuanlong's originally panicked emotions became much more stable. If it was just these people, it might not mean that the mercenaries were really going to war with the Jianghu kingdom. Perhaps there were other reasons. After all, no matter how powerful the enemy was, it was too much to expect 3,000 people to take down the capital of Jianghu, which had 80,000 soldiers and 300,000 citizens. All right, this crown prince understands. Men, send him away to rest. Li Yuanlong's mind instantly flashed with countless possibilities. When he saw that the scout had left, he said to another guard beside him, "Immediately go and find General Fan and General Ruan." In less than an hour, the famous general of the Jianghu kingdom, Fan Yuhai, General Ruan Gongwang, Huang Hua, Li Xiaozhong, and the others hurriedly arrived at the crown prince's residence. Even though they didn't know what had happened, the crown prince's sudden summons meant that something big must have happened. When the generals arrived at the main hall of the crown prince's residence, Crown Prince Li Yuanlong walked into the hall under the protection of a few guards. "Greetings, Your Highness the Crown Prince." The generals bowed. "Generals, there's no need to be so courteous." Li Yuanlong sat down on a large chair and swept his gaze across the generals. Then, he said in a low voice, "I just received a report from a scout that 3,000 mercenaries suddenly came out of Beidai City. They are heading straight for our Hanoi city. Perhaps they will appear at the city's gates tomorrow." What? When the generals heard this, their expressions changed. It was obvious that they were shocked by this sudden news. However, this change in expression didn't show fear. Instead, it revealed a hint of excitement. As for the mercenaries, Ruan Gongwang and Huang Hua were the only two generals who had fought with them. Moreover, Ruan Gongwang had fought with the mercenaries in the rainforest of Mount Liang. From the beginning to the end, he hadn't seen the mercenaries. Even though his losses weren't small, he didn't have any direct knowledge of them. On the contrary, ever since he returned to Hanoi City, he had been thinking about blood. However, because the Crown Prince's policy was to delay the negotiations, there was no room for him to display his skills. Now that he finally had a chance to fight, how could he not be excited? Ruan Gongwang wasn't the only one who thought this way. Other than Huang Hua, all the other generals had the same thought. The Crown Prince's words were very clear. This time, there were only 3,000 mercenaries. 3,000 people. How big of a storm could they cause? If the other party had only sent 30,000 people, it might be scary. However, with the difference in numbers, how could they show the slightest bit of fear? Crown Prince Li Yuanlong was also paying attention to the reactions of the generals. He was very satisfied with the answer. Other than Huang Hua and Fan Yuhai who were frowning, the other generals had an eager expression. They couldn't wait to lead their troops into battle. Huang Hua's performance was within Li Yuanlong's expectations. This person had once led 5,000 mercenaries to attack Beidai City. The result was a crushing defeat. With such a shadow in his heart, it was normal for him to have no confidence when facing the mercenaries. However, Fan Yuhai was also frowning. What did this mean? At this moment, Li Yuanlong couldn't figure it out. Chapter 502. General Fan, what do you think of the current situation? Li Yuanlong called out his name. In fact, Fan Yuhai, who could be called a famous general, had some weight in the eyes of both Li Yuanlong and Li Yuanlong. Fan Yuhai, who was called out, first bowed and then raised his eyebrows. "Your Highness. Previously, we were negotiating with the mercenaries, and we even sent a lot of Han people over. Logically speaking, we should be cooperating happily. But why would they suddenly send troops over? What is the reason? Or did something happen that we don't know about? In my opinion, before things are clear, it's better not to use weapons." Fan Yuhai's words could be said to be an experienced strategist. The art of war said to subdue the enemy's soldiers without fighting, the best of the best. Above all, the best strategy was to attack the enemy. Below that was to attack the enemy. Below that was to attack the enemy. In other words, it was best not to use weapons if possible. Especially in this kind of battle where one had no confidence, one had to be extremely careful. The other generals were clearly dissatisfied with Fan Yuhai's words. The so-called generals were naturally the ones who led the troops. However, if the world was peaceful, their existence would not be so meaningful and they would inevitably be looked down upon. Therefore, a true general needed to use war to prove himself. Fan Yuhai only said that the situation was strange and needed to be investigated. If this was not to stop the soldiers, what else could it be? It would be strange if he could gain the support of the other generals. If it wasn't for the crown prince personally stating his stance, there would have been people criticizing Fan Yuhai and even impeaching him for being afraid of battle. This couldn't be said to be groundless. Crown Prince Li Yuanlong listened to Fan Yuhai's words seriously and then nodded in tacit agreement. That's right. General Fan's words are exactly what this crown prince is worried about. Before we can figure out what's going on, it's best if we don't use our weapons. Hearing that even the crown prince agreed with Fan Yuhai's words, Yuan Gongwang and the other generals were inevitably disappointed. They originally thought that they would not have the chance to lead troops this time. Unexpectedly, Crown Prince Li Yuanlong continued, "But if the mercenaries arrive tomorrow, what should we do? Are we going to let them show off and challenge us? Of course not. We don't want to go to war, but we aren't afraid of war. If the mercenaries really dare to do this, the soldiers of Jianghu won't be afraid. We'll just go out of the city and destroy their prestige." Fan Yuhai raised his head and said with determination. Anyone who could be called a famous general would not be a coward. It wasn't that Fan Yuhai didn't want to fight, but he didn't want to fight a cowardly battle without any basis. The so-called war was nothing more than a final choice in the face of the futility of peace talks and other situations. If there were other ways, no one would choose such a path that would waste manpower and resources. However, if the mercenaries were really looking down on the Jianghu army, there was no harm in teaching them a lesson. However, there were only 3,000 of them. In Hanoi City, which had an army of 80,000, they were nothing in the eyes of the generals. After all, Jianghu had been established for more than 20 years. Their military strength was definitely not limited to this. Previously, he had considered the fact that Hanoi City could not afford to station too many soldiers, so he had only sent 80,000. If he really wanted to mobilize, it would not be a problem to gather another 100,000 soldiers in the entire Jianghu prefecture. Good. Hearing Fan Yuhai's words, Li Yuanlong replied happily. This was what he wanted. No matter what the mercenaries wanted to do in Hanoi City, they could not be allowed to do as they pleased. Otherwise, it would be a provocation to him, the crown prince. This was something that he would not allow and was unwilling to see. Li Yuanlong, who already had a plan in mind, immediately started to arrange the troops after hearing Fan Yuhai's words. Some negotiations had to be fought. The principle of peace through fighting was applicable at all times. Compared to Kong Chuanxin, who led the 3 battalions out of the city, Yang Chindong's troops were not as hurried out of the city. The 5,000 Lang Feng, auxiliary soldiers, and temporary auxiliary soldiers naturally walked at the front of the group. Behind them were the 47,000 youths from Qiming City. After leaving behind 2,000 men in Chui City, 1,000 men from Beidai City were left behind to take charge of the various tasks in the city. At the end of the group was the general of Jianghu, Hong Jin, and the 2,000 newly recruited Jianghu mercenaries. After receiving Yang Chindong's instructions, Hong Jin used only a day to form a temporary army of 2,000 men. One had to admit that he was very efficient. If it wasn't for the fact that there were not many people of suitable age in Beidai City, he would probably have formed an even larger army. The 60,000 men group walked and stopped along the way. They were not in a hurry as they made their way from Beidai City to Hanoi City. Yang Chendong was in the middle of the group, riding on a strong white horse. In his hand was a handful of bullets that had just been transported. He had a look of deep thought on his face. These bullets were randomly selected by Tiger's Mane from the thousands of boxes of bullets that had been transported over. The moment the bullets were placed in Yang Chendong's hands, his expression became much more serious. Bullets were something that Yang Chendong had dealt with for many years in his previous life. From the moment the new recruits joined the company to the time he retired to the military supply department due to his age, the number of bullets that passed through his hands numbered in the tens of thousands. He did not even need to open his eyes to look at the shape of the bullets. He only needed to touch them to know what kind of gun it was, and what caliber it was. It was because he understood it so well that when he received the new bullets from Qiming City's factory, his heart was heavy. Even though Yang Chendong had taken out various books and finished bullets, they were still 500 years ahead of time. The various technologies were completely unable to keep up, causing the current process of manufacturing bullets to rely entirely on manual labor. This also caused the shape of the bullets to be completely different, and many of them were even unqualified. Just like the handful in Yang Chendong's hands, there were only a dozen bullets, and they were divided into several sizes. Among them, there were Type 81-7, 62mm bullets, and Type 95-5, 88mm bullets. Although these two sizes of bullets looked similar to the bullets used before, in reality, there were some differences in the shape and weight of the bullets. It was these differences that caused Yang Chendong a headache. Firearms were not a joke. Even for a sharpshooter, giving him a new gun would require time to get used to it. This was because even if the guns were mechanized, there would still be differences. Not to mention the bullets for these guns that were all made by hand. 5,000 newly shipped Type 81 rifles, 500 newly shipped Type 95 rifles. Yang Chendong had seen them all, and the differences were not small. Now that the differences in the bullets were so great, it would greatly reduce the accuracy of the bullets. This was where Yang Chendong was worried. First, the second batch of guns and bullets were slightly better. After all, they were all made by experienced blacksmiths. Although there were some differences, the problem was not too big. The accuracy on the battlefield could still reach about 70%. However, because of the increase in demand at the front, the munitions factory at the rear was constantly expanding. The new recruits were mostly inexperienced, so the specifications of the products were naturally much worse. Yesterday, at the temporary shooting range in Beatty City, Yang Chendong had tried it himself. With his strength, the bullets he shot only hit the target 60% of the time. After constant shooting correction, the hit rate finally reached more than 80%. It was easy to imagine that after equipping the normal auxiliary soldiers, they would have a 30% accuracy rate. That would already be very good. This was the case when technology was not developed. Yang Chendong also knew that some things could not be forced. He could only hope that the soldiers could quickly adapt to the new guns and bullets, and not let these things adapt to them. Yang Chendong, who was riding on the horse, suddenly opened his eyes and said to Tiger's Mane, who was also riding on the side, "Inform the army that there is no need to rush. Every morning and afternoon, set aside an hour for target practice." Target practice? Tiger's Mane's face showed a look of confusion. He wanted to say that target practice was a waste of bullets, and even the wear and tear of the guns was not small. But since it was an order from the young master, of course, he would unconditionally carry it out. He nodded, then turned around and rode off to inform the army. How could Yang Chendong not know about these disadvantages? But if the soldiers were not fully adapted to the guns and ammunition, when faced with the charge of the enemy on the battlefield, the guns in their hands would not be accurate. Once the enemy really rushed in front of them, the losses would be huge. No matter what, guns were inanimate objects. Now that they were worn out, they could kill more enemies on the battlefield, increase their accuracy, and reduce the number of casualties. No matter how one looked at it, it was worth it. Through target practice, the soldiers would be more compatible with the unique guns in their hands. This was the only thing Yang Chendong could do for the soldiers. Not long after the order was given, the army stopped, and close to 50,000 Crimson City youth started to cook. Not far away, gunshots could be heard. The target practice had begun. The deafening gunshots caused the originally disorganized Jianghu mercenaries to change their minds. At this moment, Hong Jin's words finally carried more weight, and more people knew what it meant to obey orders. Below Hanoi City. Before midnight, the 7 battalions of mercenaries had arrived at a place 5 miles away from the city. They quickly set up tents here. Other than the 2 companies of soldiers who were in charge of guarding and keeping watch, the rest of the soldiers went to sleep after eating. Everyone knew that when dawn came, there would be a huge battle waiting for them. Chapter 503. While the soldiers were resting, Kong Chuanshin, as the battalion commander, did not go to rest. Instead, he called for his 4 company commanders and 6 auxiliary battalion commanders to gather around a bonfire for a meeting. Ever since they left Beidai City, Kong Chuanshin's excitement hadn't stopped. This was the first battle against the capital of the Jianghu nation, Hanoi City. Now that it was handed over to him, it was enough to prove how much the 6th young master valued him. This was also the first time the mercenaries fought against an enemy's capital. It was bound to be recorded in the annals of history. As the commander of this battle, he was bound to be remembered in the history of the mercenaries. However, whether this record was good or bad would depend on tomorrow's performance. He called all the officers over for a discussion. Even though there were 7 battalion commanders, including himself, but in reality, there were still some differences in strength. For example, Kong Chuanxin's position as the commander of the Cold Vanguard Battalion had the highest authority. He was equivalent to a battalion commander of the A Battalion. An auxiliary battalion was equivalent to a B Battalion, and a temporary auxiliary battalion was equivalent to a C Battalion. Therefore, right from the start of the meeting, Kong Chuanxin held the initiative. He didn't even bother to ask the other 6 battalion commanders what they thought. Instead, he focused his attention on Tiansu, the company commander of the 3rd Battalion's 1st Company. If the 3rd Battalion of the Cold Vanguard Battalion was the main offensive company, then the commander of the 1st Company under him was the best company of the 3rd Battalion. At the very least, the destructive power and military strength of this company was far greater than that of an auxiliary battalion. Compared to the temporary auxiliary battalion, it was at least 3 to 4 times more powerful. 1st Company Commander, what do you think of being the main offensive force for tomorrow's battle? Kong Chuanxin asked directly without any pleasantries. Thank you for your trust. 1st Company will definitely complete the mission. Tiansu stood up excitedly. His face was flushed with excitement. Naturally, the other 3 company commanders of the 3rd Battalion were dissatisfied. But there was nothing they could do about it. After all, he was the company commander of the 1st Company. In the previous few small-scale competitions held in the barracks, the 1st Company had always been victorious. They were the most outstanding in all aspects, and this was also recognized by everyone. After considering the importance of tomorrow's battle, the 3 company commanders didn't say anything even though they were still a little jealous. It was a good thing to have a certain level of competition. However, if internal strife were to occur because of this, it would ultimately affect the overall combat strength of the entire 3rd Battalion. That would be a big deal. The result was very straightforward. Whoever had internal strife would be fired. Due to this reason, since the establishment of Cold Front, 4 company-level officers had been demoted because of internal strife. They had all been reported to the 6th Young Master for approval. The 4 company commanders, who originally had a bright future ahead of them, wanted to achieve more achievements, so they started to play tricks in the dark. Later, they were discovered by the government and reported to the 6th Young Master. The 4 of them were immediately removed from their positions and sent to the various factories in Crimson City for observation. If they didn't perform well, they would be sent to farm, and there would be no future for them. The 6th Young Master had said more than once that it was hard to find a 3-legged toad, but there were plenty of 2-legged people. Especially in the Cold Front, there were many heroes and heroines. Even without them, the Cold Front would still continue. If anyone dared to have such thoughts and wanted to challenge his bottom line, then they could try. After the incident with the 4 company commanders, the relationship between the officers had improved a lot. Normal competition still existed, and this was encouraged by the higher-ups. However, there were no longer any cases of people using unscrupulous methods to achieve victory. Perhaps there were still some who had such thoughts, but they definitely wouldn't dare to do it. When Tiansu was called out by Kong Chuanxin, his face was filled with excitement. Kong Chuanxin was also very satisfied with the morale of the other party. He nodded and said, "Good. Tomorrow morning, we will see your company's performance. The other battalions will cooperate with you. However, I will say the ugly words first. If your performance is not good, and you don't reach the standard of your usual training, then this battalion commander will have the authority to replace you at any time. When that time comes, don't come complaining to me." "Yes, I promise to complete the mission." After saying this, Tiansu scratched his head embarrassedly. Obviously, this wasn't the first time he had complained to his superiors because he couldn't get the main attack mission. Kong Chuanxin quickly decided on the main attack mission, causing the auxiliary battalion commanders and temporary battalion commanders to be extremely envious. However, they could only be envious in their hearts. After all, Lang Feng's strength was there for all to see. Lang Feng was able to hit the target with 60% to 70% of the bullets that were issued later. However, the temporary battalion commanders only had an average of 30% of the bullets. With such a huge difference, even if they weren't convinced, they had no choice but to accept it. After the main attack mission was assigned, it was time to assign the auxiliary attack missions. Regarding this, the military plan had already been formulated before they set off from Beidao City. Now, it was just a matter of repeating it. It was because of this that the pre-battle meeting was conducted in an orderly manner. Compared to the calm mercenaries outside the city, the Jianghu soldiers in Hanoi City were shocked by the sudden appearance of the enemy. The general on duty reported the discovery of the mercenaries to his superiors. When the news reached the ears of the crown prince, Li Yuanlong, who was in the palace, he was extremely shocked. The first thing he said was, "How can these mercenaries be so fast? Did they fall from the sky?" Li Yuanlong couldn't be blamed for this. The distance between Beidao City and Hanoi City was close to 200 li based on the speed of the Jianghu army. It would normally take 3 days if they were fast, 4 to 5 days if they were slow. However, in less than a day, the mercenaries had already covered the entire distance. Just this speed alone was enough to make one look at them in a new light. The generals in the city were also summoned to the main hall of the palace. After hearing the news, they were all extremely shocked. Just like the time when Huang Hua led his army to attack Beidao City, he had already tried his best. However, it still took 2.5 days for 5,000 soldiers to reach Beidao City. In comparison, wouldn't his marching speed be no different from a snail's? Fortunately, this topic was quickly forgotten. The first thing everyone did when they gathered was to think about what to do next. The original plan was to leave the city the next day and arrange the troops to prepare for battle. However, from the looks of it now, it wasn't appropriate to do so. Crown Prince Li Yuanlong turned his attention to General Yuan Gengwang. After all, the first battle of the plan was to be completed by this person. Previously, Yuan Gengwang's troops had contributed greatly to the battle with King Min in Nanming Kingdom. When they deployed, they only had 50,000 men. Later on, they expanded to 100,000 men. They even brought back 10,000 captives and various treasures. At that time, he was in the limelight. At that time, Yuan Gengwang was also in the limelight and looked down on everyone. With the appearance of the mercenaries, the situation began to change. As a result, only 15% of his 100,000 men returned to Hanoi City. When they deployed 50,000 men, they only returned 15,000 defeated soldiers. This caused many people to question Yuan Gengwang's ability. Coincidentally, Prime Minister Yuan Chunqing went to Beidao City to negotiate with the Jianghu army. His position became even more precarious. Helplessly, he could only try his best to fight for the role of the vanguard. He hoped that he could redeem himself from the previous defeat and become a pillar among the generals again. Li Yuanlong also gave him a chance to turn over a new leaf. He used his position as crown prince to convince everyone. Not only did he not take back his original authority of 15,000 men, he gave him another 5,000 men, making 20,000 men as the vanguard. 20,000 men against 3,000 mercenaries. The ratio was 7-1. Furthermore, they were fighting on their home ground. No one saw the possibility of defeat. However, the sudden appearance of the mercenaries had caught them off guard. However, after the initial panic, Yuan Gengwang already walked out of the ranks in armor. He cupped his fist and said to Li Yuanlong, "Your Highness, I am willing to lead soldiers out of the city tonight to set up defenses in preparation for tomorrow's battle." Good. Li Yuanlong was waiting for this sentence. "Thank you for your hard work, General Yuan. In a while, you can go get 1,000 iron shields to prepare for tomorrow's battle. The other generals, do your own work according to what we discussed earlier. When the sky brightens, follow me to the city tower to take a look." "Yes." All the generals bowed and replied in unison. Among them, Yuan Gengwang's face was flushed red. He was faintly excited. Not long after the generals came out of the palace returned to the camp, Yuan Gengwang's troops moved. 20,000 soldiers came out of the east side of the city and began to form a formation 2 miles away from the city. They made a huge commotion. This also attracted the attention of the mercenaries. The 2 company commanders in charge of security had their bayonets loaded with guns. If anything unexpected happened, they would fire their guns. Fortunately, Yuan Gengwang's troops only came out of the city and did not intend to attack immediately. Perhaps he also wanted to take action at dawn. This was an opportunity to perform well in front of the crown prince and the civil and military officials. If they attacked the camp now, even if they won, How many people would be able to see their majestic and heroic appearance? Fortunately, Ruan Gongwang did not send troops out at night. Otherwise they, who were not good at night battles, would lose even more miserably. Of course, General Ruan did not understand this point yet. Everything would have to wait until dawn. After the results of the battle were out, he would know what it meant to strike a stone with an egg. Following this, even though the distance between the two armies was less than 3 miles, and the enemy's barracks could be seen from afar, it was still peaceful. When dawn broke the next day, smoke rose from the camp. The cooks started to get busy. A great battle was about to take place in Jianghu. Chapter 504. Southern Ming Capital. Nanjing Imperial Palace. The Minister of Rites, Lu De, was asked to stay behind by Zhu Qizhen after the morning assembly. Compared to a while ago, Zhu Qizhen's face was much rosier, and his mental state was much stronger. Even when he spoke to his subjects, his tone was much friendlier. Minister Lu, how are the negotiations with the Jianghu diplomatic mission going? Your Majesty, this subject is preparing to report this matter to you. Just last night, after the efforts of the officials from the Ministry of Rites, the Jianghu diplomatic group finally agreed to submit to the Southern Ming dynasty. If needed, they can also send troops to attack the Min King's army. Your Majesty only needs to issue a decree for the Duke of Loyalty to disband the mercenaries. When talking about these, Lu De could be said to be talking non-stop, spittle flying everywhere. The so-called unity of the Ministry of Rites was actually nothing much. It was only because the Jianghu diplomatic mission could not drag on any longer that they took the initiative to give in. However, other people didn't know about all this. Lu De could naturally put all the credit on his head and flatter himself. When Zhu Qizhen heard that Jianghu was not only willing to submit, but also send troops to help him deal with the rebel king of Min's faction, his eyes widened. He then shouted loudly and slapped his hands on the dragon shore. It was no wonder that Zhu Qizhen was so excited. If it was a small Jianghu in the past, he would not take it seriously. However, ever since his defeat at the Battle of Tumu, he had not had a peaceful time. He had walked step by step. To be able to persevere until now, he felt somewhat tired. After enduring for so long, he finally saw hope. How could he not be excited? How could he not be excited? Zhu Qizhen was truly happy. The king of Min was able to gain power with the help of the Jianghu army. Why couldn't he gain their help to defeat the enemy? Once the king of Min's army was defeated, the southern Ming would take back Guangdong, Guangxi, and Yunnan. Not only that, he had also gained the friendship of Jianghu. When the time came, he could ask them to send troops to help him deal with the Baiming king of Yu, Zhu Qiyu. It would not be impossible for him to unify the Great Ming. When Zhu Qizhen thought about how he finally saw the hope of unifying the Great Ming dynasty, he wanted to cry. In the past 2 years, he rarely had a good night's sleep. Most of the time, he had nightmares. Now that he could finally get rid of all of this, it was a wonderful feeling. Zhu Qizhen's cheerful appearance was seen by Lu De. On the surface, he also had a smile on his face, as if he was happy for the emperor, but in his heart, he was thinking about how to use this opportunity to deal with Yang Chendong. Putting aside the fact that he had been in conflict with Yang Chendong because of the Hangzhou prefectural magistrate, when Yang Chendong had asked for the throne, even when Zhu Qizhen had agreed to it, he had taken the initiative to step forward and come up with a plan. He had used the reason that he needed to inform the emperor of Baiming to ruin the plan. From this point alone, the conflict between the two sides was irreconcilable. A while ago, he heard that the mercenaries had actually killed their way through the Langsun region and reached the hinterland of Jianghu. No one was more worried than him. Lu De was truly afraid that Yang Chendong was too powerful. If that was the case, he would be able to cause trouble for him at any time. Just as he was anxious and hesitant, even Lu De was thinking about whether he should send someone to contact Yang Chendong privately and take the initiative to submit to him in order to ensure his safety in the future. The Jianghu diplomatic group appeared at the right time. After forgiving them for 2 or 3 days, they completely submitted to him. This gave Lu De hope that the matter could be resolved. Now that he saw how happy Zhu Qizhen was, he rolled his eyes and cupped his fists. Your Majesty, Jianghu is willing to submit to you and is willing to help your Majesty send troops to quell the rebellion. However, there is a prerequisite for all of this. That is, the Duke of Loyalty has to disband the mercenaries. However, there is a saying since ancient times that when a general is away, military orders cannot be given. Will he agree? After hearing this, Zhu Qizhen's eyes flashed with anger. He was the current emperor. His words were the Imperial Edict. If anyone disobeyed, it would be considered as disobeying the Imperial Edict. Who would dare to disobey the Imperial Edict? Of course, this anger was only a flash. Even Zhu Qizhen himself knew that his so-called authority as the emperor was naturally an extraordinary existence in the eyes of other officials, but it might not really have any effect on Yang Chendong. Didn't he previously order the Duke of Loyalty, who had resolved the rebellion in Guangdong, to disband the mercenaries and return to the capital? However, the other party still didn't agree. Not to mention, Jianghu, which was thousands of li away, had the qualifications to disobey the Imperial Edict. If Yang Chendong disobeyed his Imperial Edict, wouldn't his reputation as the emperor be tarnished if word got out? If that really happened, Jianghu wouldn't seek him out even if they had to admit defeat. The favorable situation would be lost in an instant. Zhu Qizhen felt a headache coming on. But no matter what, he was still an emperor. Even if Zhu Qizhen didn't have the confidence, he couldn't show weakness in front of an official. So he only said ambiguously, "Beloved official Lu is right. The Duke of Zhongdan is currently fighting a bloody battle in Jianghu. We also don't know what the situation is like there. If the Imperial Edict delayed something important, wouldn't it be our fault?" He wasn't confident at all. However, he made it sound so dignified. Otherwise, how could he be the emperor? The word official could be said in any way. Although he understood this, Lu De definitely wouldn't expose him. This was a slap to the emperor's face. Unless he didn't want to live anymore, he definitely wouldn't do it. Not only that, he also pretended to be very understanding. "Your Majesty is wise. The Duke of Loyalty's situation isn't something we can know about immediately. Perhaps he's facing some difficulties." Seeing Lu De on the right track, Zhu Qizhen was naturally very happy. He hurriedly nodded and said, "Yes, yes. Beloved official Lu is still the one who understands us." "That's right. Does the Jianghu diplomatic corps have any other explanation?" Clearly, Zhu Qizhen was trying to think of another way by asking this question. After all, he couldn't guarantee that the Imperial Edict would be able to persuade Yang Chendong. He wanted to think of a solution from the weakened Jianghu diplomatic corps. Lu De understood Zhu Qizhen's intentions and had a troubled expression. "I'm afraid that won't work. If the Duke of Loyalty doesn't withdraw his troops, Jianghu can't even take care of itself. How can they help us?" "Is that so?" "That's true." Zhu Qizhen nodded and didn't say anything else. Lu De, who was standing below, was secretly discussing Zhu Qizhen's fantasy. He didn't have 100% confidence in making Yang Chendong withdraw his troops from Jianghu. Yet, he still wanted Jianghu to send troops to help him deal with the rebellious Min royal lineage. He wanted to take all the good things in the world. How could that be possible? Not to mention that Lu De really didn't have any way to persuade the Jianghu army. Even if he did, he wouldn't help. He couldn't wait for Yang Chendong to be unlucky. Now that he had finally found an opportunity, how could he take the initiative to retreat? As the saying goes, one should take action when one should. Seeing Zhu Qizhen hesitate, Lu De hardened his heart and decided to add fuel to the fire. However, if he did so, the hatred between him and Yang Chendong would be irreconcilable. But unless that was the case, he would have to lower his head to Yang Chendong. For Lu De, the Minister of Rights, to lower his head to a junior was too embarrassing. That would be no different from killing him. After making the decision to offend Yang Chendong to the end, Lu De saw Zhu Qizhen's silence and spoke again. "Your Majesty, it's actually not impossible to persuade the Duke of Loyalty." Zhu Qizhen was still thinking about how to use the current situation to obtain the best advantage for himself when he suddenly heard Lu De's words. "Beloved official Lu, you say you have a way? What is it?" "Your Majesty, there is a way. However, if we do this, it will inevitably draw the displeasure of the Duke of Loyalty. However, compared to resolving the King of Min's rebellion and restoring the Southern Ming Empire's clarity, one person's honor and disgrace are nothing. In short, we will have to ask your Majesty to make a decision." Lu De didn't directly state the method. Instead, He had a troubled expression on his face. He wanted to do his best to distance himself from the matter. Zhu Qizhen didn't think so much. He only wanted to solve the problem. Thus, he looked at Lu De with an urging expression. Beloved official Lu, if you have an idea, just say it. Whether it will work or not, we will make the decision. Yes. Lu De hurriedly agreed and then said, Your Majesty, from what this official knows, the Duke of Loyalty has an extremely good relationship with his fourth brother. This person is now in Fujian's Jianghu prefecture. If we can persuade this person, I think the Duke of Loyalty will have to withdraw his troops for the sake of kinship. However, in this way, it is inevitable that he will have resentment. Lu De didn't say much after that. He believed that Zhu Qizhen must have understood his hint. To put it bluntly, it was to use Yang Chendong's fourth brother as a hostage to blackmail him. Although this method was not open and aboveboard, compared to getting everything, it was worth it. Zhu Qizhen did understand Lu De's meaning, but he didn't immediately make a decision. Of course, he knew that once he did so, it was tantamount to offending Yang Chendong to death. Yang Chendong was not an outsider. If it were any other of his subjects, Zhu Qizhen would not even hesitate to issue an edict to arrest the person immediately. However, Yang Chendong now had a large number of troops in his hands. If he really pushed him to the edge and pushed him to the King of Min's side, wouldn't the loss outweigh the gain? Wouldn't he be shooting himself in the foot? If he couldn't achieve his goal after being the bad guy, then he would be asking for trouble. You're tuning in to the Wisdom Diary YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.